They say an alpha king fears nothing. That's a damn lie. King Draven Kalor, the most brutal ruler the Empire of Valor had ever known, feared exactly one thing: the woman standing across his war table, telling him his strategy was shit. Serafina Valhart didn't bow, didn't flinch, didn't play the game every other noble played in his court, and that terrified him more than any assassin's blade ever could. Because the thing about desire in a world built on blood and power, it doesn't ask permission, it just takes. And it destroys everything in its path. Stay until the end, hit that like, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. This story gets darker before it gets better. Dates Basti. The throne room of Kalor Palace stank of fear and expensive perfume. Draven could smell both from where he sat, sprawled across the crimson throne like a predator who'd gorged himself on meat and still wanted more. 63 nobles packed the hall, their silk and velvet costumes dripping with enough wealth to feed a province for a year. None of them looked at him directly. They never did. Good. Fear kept them alive. Fear kept them loyal. Fear was the only currency that mattered in an empire built on the bones of weaker kingdoms. Lord Castellan Thorne stood at the base of the throne, reading from a scroll in that droning, bureaucratic voice that made Draven want to gut something. Supply reports, troop movements, tax revenues from the northern territories, the mundane machinery of empire, grinding forward like it always did. Draven wasn't listening. His eyes tracked across the crowd until they found her. Third row back, standing between Duke Valhart and some forgettable cousin in a ridiculous hat. Serafina Valhart wore midnight blue, simple cut, no jewels except a single silver pin at her throat. While every other woman in the hall had dressed like they were auditioning to be his whore, she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. That made him want her more. 3 years. 3 goddamn years since her father had brought her to court as his military advisor. 3 years of watching her stand in his war councils, dissecting battle plans with a mind sharper than any blade in his armory. 3 years of wanting something he couldn't just take, because Serafina Valhart was the one weapon he couldn't afford to break. Thorne finished his report. The nobles shifted, that restless energy that came before someone had to speak and risk saying the wrong thing. Draven let the silence stretch until sweat appeared on foreheads. Then he stood. The movement was lazy, deliberate. He was a big man, built like the warlord he'd been before the crown, and he knew how to use space like a threat. He descended the throne steps slowly, boots echoing on marble. "Tell me something interesting," he said. His voice carried that rough edge that came from years of shouting orders across battlefields. "Or get the hell out of my palace." More shifting, more nervous glances. Then Duke Heron stepped forward, pudgy face already red with either courage or stupidity. "Your Majesty, the Crimson Moon Festival is 3 weeks away. The people expect—" "I know what they expect," Draven cut him off. "They expect me to get drunk, bed some noble daughters, and pretend I give a damn about their moon superstitions. Same as every year." Heron's face went from red to purple. "Your Majesty, with respect, the festival is tradition. The people need to remember who keeps them from being conquered by the Shadowlands or enslaved by the Iron Territories." Draven stopped in front of Heron, close enough to watch the man's throat work as he swallowed. "Everything else is theater." But someone else spoke up. A woman's voice, clear and cold as river water. "Theater keeps empires together as much as swords do." The crowd parted slightly. Serafina stepped forward, meeting his eyes without hesitation. She didn't have her father's politician smile or her cousin's social graces. She had something more dangerous: absolute confidence in her own judgment. Draven felt that familiar pull in his chest, the one that showed up whenever she challenged him. The alpha bond humming beneath his skin like voltage. "Lady Valhart," he said softly, "you have an opinion about moon festivals?" "I have an opinion about political strategy, Your Majesty." She moved closer, and he caught her scent. Leather and steel and something floral he couldn't name. "You've won every military campaign for 15 years. Your armies are legendary. Your enemies are terrified. But fear alone doesn't build loyalty in peacetime. It builds resentment, and resentment builds rebellions." The nobles held their breath. No one spoke to the king like that. No one questioned his methods. No one survived calling his rule insufficient. Draven smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Go on. Seraphina didn't hesitate. The Crimson Moon Festival is the one night when your people see you as something more than a warlord. They see pageantry, tradition, connection to something older than conquest. You announce a queen. You give them hope for continuity, for legacy, for a future that isn't just waiting for the next war. She paused, and her eyes never left his. And you give the noble houses something to fight over besides your throne. The silence in the hall was absolute now. Even Thorn had stopped breathing. Draven studied her, the sharp angles of her face, the way she stood like she had steel in her spine, the complete absence of fear in her expression. Most people looked at him and saw death waiting to happen. Seraphina looked at him like he was a complicated tactical problem she was solving in real time. It made him want to drag her to his chambers and see if he could make her lose that control. It also made her the most valuable asset in his court. "You think I should choose a queen?" he said quietly. "I think you should appear to consider it." She tilted her head slightly. "The announcement alone will shift the political landscape. Every noble house will scramble for position. Every alliance will be tested. You'll learn more about your court's loyalty in 3 weeks than you have in 3 years. And when I don't actually choose anyone, then you maintain power while your enemies exhaust themselves fighting each other." Her lips curved slightly. "It's called strategy, Your Majesty. I believe you're familiar with the concept." Someone in the crowd made a choking sound. Possibly Heron. Possibly someone having a stroke. Draven held her gaze for another moment, then turned back to the throne. When he spoke, his voice carried across the hall like a blade. "The Crimson Moon Festival will proceed as planned, and Lady Veilheart is correct. I will announce my intention to choose a queen." The explosion of sound was immediate. Gasps, whispers, the rustle of silk as people turned to gossip. Draven ignored it all. He climbed back to the throne and sat down, sprawling again like he owned the world. Because he did. "Dismissed," he said. The nobles fled, some slowly maintaining dignity, others practically running for the doors. Within minutes, only his personal guard remained, stone-faced along the walls. And Seraphina, still standing where he'd left her, watching him with those calculating eyes. He waited until the last noble was gone. Then he gestured, and even the guards left, closing the massive doors behind them. Alone. The word hummed between them like a challenge. Seraphina walked toward the throne, boot heels clicking on marble. She stopped at the base of the steps, looking up at him. "That was reckless," she said. "That was necessary." Draven leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You were right. The noble houses are getting restless. I've been watching the reports. Whispers of alliance. Unusual troop movements near border territories. Someone's planning something. Multiple someones, she corrected. House Mordain has been meeting with House Blackridge in secret. House Sterling doubled their city guard last month, and Duchess Evelise has been corresponding with the Iron Territories. He already knew most of that. His spies were thorough. But hearing Seraphina lay it out, connecting the patterns, made the picture clearer. "You think a queen announcement will smoke them out," he said. "I think it will force them to choose sides. Right now, they're testing the waters. Give them something concrete to fight over and the real players will reveal themselves." She paused. "The weak ones will scramble for your favor. The dangerous ones will make their moves, and you'll be watching." It wasn't a question. Seraphina was always watching. That's what made her so damn good at her job. "I'm always watching, Your Majesty." She met his eyes again, and something shifted in her expression. Something he couldn't quite read. "Though I have to wonder if you've considered the full implications of what you just announced." Draven stood, descending the steps until he was close enough to smell her again, close enough to see the pulse at her throat, close enough to watch her pupils dilate slightly despite her controlled expression. "What implications?" he said softly. "The nobles will expect you to follow through." She held her ground, but he caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "They'll expect you to actually choose someone. And when you don't..." "Who says I won't?" That made her pause. For the first time since he'd known her, Seraphina Veilheart looked uncertain. The silence stretched between them, heavy, with everything they'd never said. 3 years of war councils and strategy sessions and late nights reviewing maps. 3 years of almost touches, and loaded glances and conversations that meant more than their words. 3 years of wanting something neither of them could afford. Draven stepped back, breaking the moment. "Dismissed, Lady Valehart." She blinked, then nodded. A slight bow, formal and cold. "As you command, Your Majesty." She turned and walked toward the doors, spine straight, steps measured, professional, controlled. Everything a court strategist should be. "Seraphina," he called when she reached the doors. She stopped, didn't turn around. "Good work today." He saw her shoulders rise with a breath. Then she left, and he was alone with his throne and his empire and the gnawing hunger that never quite went away. Ak. The War Council met at midnight. Draven preferred it that way. Daylight made people soft, careful with their words. Darkness brought out truth, and exhaustion stripped away pretense. 8 people sat around the obsidian table in his private war room. Duke Valehart, Seraphina's father, old and sharp as broken glass. Lord Marshal Kane, his military commander, scarred from 30 years of campaigns. Lady Morgisa, his spy master, small and vicious as a snake. 5 others, advisors whose names mattered less than their functions. And Seraphina, sitting across from him, a rolled map in front of her, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She probably hadn't. That was another thing that made him want her. She worked like the Empire's survival depended on her personally. Maybe it did. "Report," he said. Kane spoke first. "Garrison strength is solid across all territories. No unusual desertion rates. Supply lines are secure. The northern border with the Shadowlands is quiet. Too quiet. Define too quiet. No raids for 6 weeks, Your Majesty. The Shadowlands tribes raid like clockwork. When they stop, it means they're planning something bigger." Draven nodded. He'd fought the Shadowlands campaigns for years. Brutal, vicious warfare against an enemy that didn't fight by civilized rules. The silence was wrong. Increase border patrols, double the watch rotation. If they're massing for an offensive, I want to know before they cross the line. "Already done," Kane said. Lady Morgesa went next, her voice like silk over razors. "The noble houses are in chaos after your announcement, Your Majesty. Every duchess and countess with an eligible daughter is mobilizing. House Heron has already sent 3 offers of alliance. House Mordain is hosting a ball next week, ostensibly to celebrate the Crimson Moon, actually to position their daughter as a candidate. Let them position." Draven leaned back in his chair. "What about the dangerous ones? Duchess Evelise has gone quiet. Too quiet. Like the Shadowlands. She stopped all correspondence with her usual allies. Either she's conceding or she's planning something significant. Or she already has something in motion," Seraphina said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She'd been silent until now, studying the map in front of her. When she looked up, her expression was troubled. "I've been analyzing trade patterns and resource movements for the past 6 months. She unrolled her map, marked with dozens of colored pins and notation. "Look at this. House Sterling increased iron purchases by 40%. House Blackridge doubled their grain stores. House Mordain has been quietly recruiting sellswords from the Iron Territories." "So?" Duke Valehart frowned. "Could be legitimate business." "Could be," Seraphina agreed. "Except the timing is coordinated. All 3 houses started their resource buildup at the same time. 6 months ago. Long before His Majesty announced the Queen selection." The table went silent. Draven felt that cold clarity that came before battle, when chaos resolved into pattern and pattern revealed intention. They were planning a move before I gave them an excuse. "Yes." Seraphina met his eyes. "The Queen announcement didn't start anything. It accelerated something already in motion." "Which means someone's been organizing this for at least half a year," Lady Morgesa said slowly. "Multiple noble houses, coordinated planning, resource buildup. That's not a power grab. That's a rebellion." The word hung in the air like poison. "Who's the center?" Draven asked. "Unknown." Morgesa's jaw tightened. "Whoever's coordinating this is good. Better than good. They've kept the central node hidden. Every house I've investigated appears to be acting independently." "Because they are," Seraphina said. "That's the genius of it. You don't need a central leader if everyone agrees on the objective. Remove the king. Fight about succession later. Remove me," Draven corrected. "Say it plain." She didn't flinch. "Remove you. The Empire is strong because you're strong. But you're also the single point of failure. No heir, no designated succession, no clear transition of power. If you die, Vialor collapses into civil war within a week. And half the noble houses think they can survive that war, Duke Valhart added. They're wrong, but they think it. Draven stood, moving to the wall where a massive map of the Empire hung. Valor stretched from the northern Shadowlands to the southern sea, from the Iron Territories in the east to the Storm Coast in the west. 15 provinces, 37 major noble houses, 3 million subjects, all held together by his will and his army. Serafina was right. He was a single point of failure, and someone had finally decided to test it. He turned back to the table. Timeline. When do they move? The Crimson Moon Festival, Serafina said immediately. Maximum chaos. Maximum visibility. You announce a queen, someone makes a move against you, and in the confusion, the coordinated rebellion launches. They've spent 6 months positioning resources. They'll spend the next 3 weeks positioning forces. Can we stop them? Silence. No one wanted to answer that. Draven smiled, sharp and cold. Good. Don't lie to me. Can we stop them? We can prepare, Cain said carefully. We can fortify the palace, increase security, lock down the festival. But if multiple noble houses move simultaneously with coordinated attacks across provinces, we'll be fighting on a dozen fronts. Then we identify the key players and remove them first. Draven looked at Morgesa. I want names. I want locations. I want evidence of conspiracy. You have 3 weeks. The spymaster nodded, face grim. Cain, war game every scenario. Palace assault, provincial uprising, coordinated city riots. Have response plans ready for all of them. Yes, Your Majesty. Duke Valhart, I need the loyalist houses locked down. Anyone who's proven their loyalty, make sure they stay loyal. Offer them whatever they need. Position, money, land, I don't care. The old Duke nodded. And the Queen announcement? Stands. Draven returned to his chair. In fact, we accelerate it. If they want to fight over a queen, let's give them something to fight about. That's when Serafina spoke again, voice quieter than before. Your Majesty, there's another consideration. He looked at her. She was gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. If you announce a queen and the rebellion moves against you, anyone you name becomes a target. Every house sees the queen as a path to the throne. If you die, whoever wears the crown becomes the most valuable hostage in the empire. They'll go after her to secure their own succession claims. So I choose someone expendable. Something flashed across her face. Anger, maybe. Or hurt. It was gone before he could read it clearly. Is anyone in this room expendable, Your Majesty? The question hit harder than it should have, because the answer was no. Everyone at this table mattered. Everyone here was necessary. And everyone here was a target, especially her. The meeting continued for another hour, plans and contingencies and tactical details, but Draven's mind was elsewhere, turning over the implications. A rebellion had been brewing for 6 months. Someone brilliant and patient was coordinating it, and the Crimson Moon Festival was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare for war. 3 weeks to figure out which of his nobles wanted him dead. 3 weeks to pretend he wasn't thinking about the woman sitting across from him, strategizing his survival, looking like she carried the weight of the empire on her shoulders. When they finally dismissed, he called her back. Just like in the throne room, just like always. The others filed out. Duke Valhart gave his daughter a look, concerned and knowing at the same time. She nodded slightly and he left. Alone again. Serafina stayed by the table, not approaching. You wanted something, Your Majesty? Draven poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the decanter on the side table. Expensive stuff from the western provinces, amber and smooth. He walked over, offered her one. She took it but didn't drink. You look like hell, he said. You announce an impending queen selection and unmask a conspiracy in the same day. Hell seems appropriate. He almost smiled. When's the last time you slept? Sleep is for people who don't have empires falling apart. Now he did smile. That's my line. Then maybe you should sleep more too. She finally drank, a small sip, eyes closing briefly. God, that's good. 12-year reserve, perks of being king. Must be nice. They stood there in the war room, surrounded by maps and battle plans and evidence of coming violence. Outside, the palace slept. Beyond that, the Empire slept, unaware that their king was planning for civil war, unaware that he'd been in love with his war strategist for 3 years and hadn't done a damn thing about it. "Tell me the truth," Draven said quietly. "How bad is this?" Serafina met his eyes. "The truth? It's bad. Multiple noble houses, coordinated planning, resources in position. Whoever is running this isn't stupid. They've had months to prepare. And we have weeks. Can we win? Against an external enemy? Absolutely. Against our own nobility?" She paused. "Civil war is different. Every battle weakens the empire. Every house you crush is territory you have to occupy. Every noble you execute makes others more desperate. Even if you win, Valor loses." "Then what do you recommend?" "Find the center." She set down her glass. "There has to be someone coordinating this. No one else knows who they are, but they know everyone. Find them, remove them, and the rebellion collapses into chaos. The houses turn on each other instead of you. And if we can't find them in 3 weeks, then you announce a queen, survive the Crimson Moon Festival, and prepare for the longest, bloodiest war of your reign." Her expression was bleak. "And pray the Shadowlands don't invade while we're tearing ourselves apart." Draven drank his whiskey, letting the burn center him. He'd fought wars his entire life. Border campaigns, succession conflicts, the brutal Shadowlands offensive that had earned him the throne 15 years ago. He'd won them all through strength, tactics, and the willingness to be more vicious than his enemies. But this was different. This was fighting ghosts, fighting his own people, fighting an enemy he couldn't see. He hated it. "One more question," he said. "If you were coordinating this rebellion, what would be your opening move?" Serafina didn't hesitate. "Kill you at the festival. Public, symbolic, maximum chaos. Then position my own candidate as the stabilizing force. Someone the other houses would accept. Someone who could claim to restore order. So I need to survive the festival." "You need to survive the next 3 weeks," she corrected. "Because whoever is running this will try to remove you before you can prepare. An accident, an illness, a quiet assassination that looks like natural causes." He studied her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her jaw. "You're worried. I'm always worried. It's my job. You're worried about me specifically." She looked away. "That's not relevant." "It is to me." The silence stretched between them again, heavy with unspoken things. Draven knew he should let it go, should maintain the professional distance that kept his court functional and his strategy intact, should stop playing this game where he called her back after meetings just to see how long he could keep her there. But he was tired and worried, and the woman standing 3 feet away from him was the only person in the Empire he actually trusted. So he said it. "I'm considering you." Serafina's head snapped up. "What? For Queen? I'm considering you." Her face went through several expressions very quickly: shock, confusion, anger, and something else he couldn't name. When she finally spoke, her voice was harsh. "That's not funny. I'm not joking. You can't be serious." She stepped back, putting distance between them. "I'm your strategist, your advisor. That's insane. Why? Why?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I'm not noble enough. Because my house doesn't have the military strength to support a claim. Because half your court already hates me for being too influential. Because announcing me as queen would cause exactly the kind of civil war we're trying to prevent." "All true," Draven said calmly. "Also irrelevant." "How is that irrelevant?" "Because I don't give a damn about politics right now." He moved closer, watching her retreat until her back hit the wall. "I care about surviving the next 3 weeks. I care about identifying my enemies. And I care about keeping the one person I trust close enough to watch my back. That's not what a queen is for." "No. But it's what you're for." She stared at him, breathing hard, trapped between his body and the stone wall. He could see her mind working, processing scenarios, calculating outcomes. That's what she did. Turn chaos into strategy, emotion into logic. Except right now, logic was failing her. "You're afraid," he said softly. "Of course I'm afraid. You just told me you're considering making me the most valuable target in a brewing rebellion. Fear seems appropriate. Not of that. You're afraid of this." He leaned closer, not touching, just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that he could feel her breath, close enough that the air between them felt electric. "Your Majesty," she said, and her voice shook slightly. "This is inappropriate." "Probably." He didn't move back. "Do you want me to stop?" The question hung between them like a blade. Serafina's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Truth, maybe. Or permission. Or a way out that didn't involve acknowledging what had been building between them for 3 years. She didn't find it. "Yes," she whispered, "you should stop." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tightened. "I want you to let me do my job. I want you to survive this rebellion. I want to keep this empire from collapsing." "Still not what I asked, Serafina." Her name on his lips made something shift in her expression. For just a moment, the control cracked. For just a moment, he saw hunger there that matched his own. Then she turned her face away, breaking eye contact. "It doesn't matter what I want. What matters is keeping you alive." Draven stepped back, giving her space, giving them both space to breathe. "Dismissed," he said quietly. She fled. Not running, because Serafina Velhart didn't run from anything, but moving fast, spine straight, dignity intact. The door closed behind her, and he was alone again. He returned to the whiskey, poured another glass, drank it standing at the window overlooking the city. Kaelor sprawled beneath the palace, a sprawl of lights and darkness, and 300,000 souls who had no idea their world was about to burn. He'd meant what he said. He was considering her. Not because it made political sense, it didn't. Not because it would prevent the rebellion, it wouldn't. But because the idea of choosing anyone else made him want to destroy something. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because Alpha Kings didn't fall in love. They didn't compromise. They didn't let desire cloud their judgment. But Draven Kaelor was falling anyway, and the ground was coming up fast. The Crimson Moon Festival preparations began the next morning. The palace transformed into controlled chaos. Servants hung red silk from every balcony. Merchants arrived with crates of wine and exotic foods. Musicians set up stages in the courtyards. The great ballroom, normally used for state functions, became a staging ground for the largest celebration in 5 years. Draven watched it all from his study, working through intelligence reports while the Empire pretended everything was normal. It wasn't normal. Morgesa's spies reported increased activity among the suspect noble houses, meetings in unexpected locations, messages carried by riders who took circuitous routes, money changing hands through intermediaries. Kane positioned additional troops around the palace, disguised as festival security. Every guard was vetted personally. Every entrance was fortified. The palace became a fortress pretending to be a party venue, and the nobles kept arriving. Every major house sent representatives. Some brought their daughters, elaborately dressed and trained in courtly graces. Some brought gifts, expensive and symbolic, all brought ambition. Draven received them in formal audiences, playing his role. He was gracious, attentive. He listened to their petitions and admired their daughters, and gave no indication which way his favor leaned. It was exhausting. But Serafina had been right. The announcement was smoking out the players. Some houses showed desperation in their eagerness. Others showed calculation in their restraint. And a few showed nothing at all, which made them the most dangerous. Duchess Evelise arrived on the 3rd day. She came with a small retinue, elegant and controlled. Mid-40s, beautiful in the way that came from good breeding and better discipline. Widow of the Duke of Stonereach, commander of one of the wealthiest provinces in the Empire. Politically connected. Militarily strong. Ambitious as hell. And according to Morgesa, corresponding with the Iron Territories. Draven received her in the formal reception hall, Serafina standing behind his chair like a shadow. The Duchess approached with perfect grace, curtsied with perfect form, and smiled with perfect coldness. "Your Majesty, it's been too long." "Duchess." He gestured to a chair. "Please." She sat, arranging her skirts with practiced precision. "The palace is magnificent. The preparations are impressive. You honor the traditions. I honor what keeps the Empire stable." "Of course." Her eyes flicked to Serafina, then back to him. "I hear congratulations are in order. A queen at last. The court has waited years for this announcement. The court has waited for me to marry and die so they can fight over the succession," Draven said bluntly. "Let's not pretend this is about romance." Evelise laughed, genuine amusement lighting her face. "I do appreciate your honesty, Your Majesty. Most kings would insist on maintaining the fiction. Most kings are weak, and you are not. She leaned forward slightly. Which is why I want to make you an offer. I'm listening. Marry my niece. She's young, beautiful, educated. House Stonereach is wealthy and loyal. Our armies are strong. Our territory is stable. An alliance between us would secure the eastern provinces and give you a clear line of succession. Your niece is 17, Draven said. Old enough to bear children, young enough to be molded into whatever you need her to be. The calculation in her voice made his skin crawl. That's your pitch? An obedient child? That's reality, Your Majesty. You need a queen who won't challenge you, who won't complicate your rule, who will give you heirs and stay out of your way. My niece is perfect for that. Behind him, Seraphina was silent, but he could feel her tension like a physical presence. I'll consider your offer, Draven said neutrally. Is there anything else? Just one thing. Evelise's smile sharpened. Be careful who you trust, Your Majesty. The court is full of ambitious people. Some wear their ambition openly. Others hide it behind loyalty and competence. Her eyes flicked to Seraphina again. Thank you for the advice, Duchess. Dismissed. She left, graceful and dangerous, and Draven sat there feeling rage coil in his chest. She's positioning herself as the reasonable choice, Seraphina said quietly. Traditional. Stable. Uncontroversial. And she just called me a threat without saying my name. She's not wrong about the last part. Seraphina moved around to face him. You can't seriously be considering her niece. I'm considering everything. He rubbed his face, exhausted. That's the problem. Every choice has consequences. Every alliance creates enemies. Every decision pushes us closer to war or stability, and I can't tell which. Then don't decide yet. Keep them all guessing. That's what we planned. I know what we planned. He looked up at her. But Evelise is right about one thing. I need someone who won't complicate my rule. And you complicate everything, she finished. I know. That's not what I was going to say. Then what were you going to say? That you're the only person in this empire who tells me the truth. That I trust your judgment more than my own. That the idea of putting anyone else in that position makes me want to burn this palace down. The words came out harder than he'd intended, raw and honest. Seraphina stared at him, something breaking across her face. Draven, she said, and it was the first time she'd used his name without the title. You can't. The door burst open. Cain stood there, armor still on, face grim. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The situation was a dead spy. Cain led them to a storage room in the lower palace, away from the festival preparations. 2 guards stood outside, stone-faced. Inside, a body lay on a table covered with a cloth. Morgessa pulled back the covering. The man underneath was young, maybe 25, dressed in servant's livery. His throat had been cut, precise and professional. But what caught Draven's attention was the mark on his wrist, a small tattoo of a broken crown. One of mine, Morgessa said flatly. I had him embedded in House Mordain 3 months ago. He was supposed to report yesterday. Instead, he showed up in our wine cellar with his throat slit and this in his pocket. She held up a folded paper. Draven took it, opened it. 4 words written in neat script. The king dies tonight. Tonight, Seraphina repeated. Not at the festival. Tonight. Cain nodded. Whoever's running this knows we're investigating. They know we're preparing, so they moved up their timeline. Who knew about your spy? Draven asked Morgessa. Only my inner circle. She looked sick. Which means either I have a traitor in my network, or House Mordain is better at counterintelligence than I thought. Or both, Seraphina said quietly. Draven studied the body. The cut was clean, professional, not angry or rushed. Someone who killed for a living had done this. And the message was clear. We know you're watching, and we're coming anyway. He looked at Cain. Security status? Every entrance is covered. Every guard is vetted. The palace is locked down as much as it can be during festival prep. Cain's jaw was tight, but with 300 servants and 100 nobles wandering around, someone could get through. Then we assume they will. Draven folded the note, slipped it into his pocket. Morgessa, I want every noble in this palace accounted for tonight. I want to know where they are, who they're talking to, and what they're doing. Cain, double the guard on my chambers and the throne room. No one gets close without verification. And you? Serafina asked. I'll be in my chambers armed and waiting. He looked at each of them. If they want me tonight, let them come. We'll see who bleeds. That's insane, Serafina said. You're making yourself bait. I'm refusing to hide in my own palace. There's a difference. No, there isn't. She stepped closer, anger flashing in her eyes. You're being reckless. You're risking everything because you're too proud to… To what? Run? He matched her anger with his own. I'm a king, Serafina. I don't run from threats. I face them. Even when facing them gets you killed, even then. They glared at each other, the room crackling with tension. Kane and Morgisa exchanged glances, smart enough to stay silent. Finally, Serafina spoke, voice low and furious. Fine. If you're staying in your chambers tonight, so am I. What? You need someone watching your back, someone you trust. That's me. She crossed her arms. Unless you're planning to dismiss me for insubordination? Draven wanted to argue, wanted to order her to safety, away from whatever was coming. But the stubborn set of her jaw told him she wouldn't listen. And the truth was, he did trust her, more than anyone. Fine, he said, but you stay behind me when the fighting starts. I'll stay wherever tactical advantage dictates, she shot back. He almost smiled. Of course she would. Night came slowly, then all at once. The palace quieted as evening fell, the frantic festival preparations winding down for the day. Draven dismissed his public schedule, claiming fatigue. The guards took positions. Morgesa's spies spread through the hallways, watching for threats, and Draven returned to his chambers with Serafina. The royal suite was massive, a sitting room, a study, a bedchamber, and a private armory. Draven locked the main doors behind them, checked the windows, then armed himself methodically. 2 long knives at his belt, a short sword across his back, a dagger in his boot. Serafina watched from the sitting room, her own weapons already visible. She'd changed from court dress to leather and dark cloth, practical and deadly. Her hair was pulled back, face cleaned of cosmetics. She looked like what she was, a warrior pretending to be nobility. You do this often? She asked. Prepare for assassination attempts? More than I'd like. He moved to the study, checking sightlines and escape routes. Being king makes you a target. You learn to live with it, or you die from it. That too. She was silent for a moment, then said quietly, When I was 16, my father took me to a battlefield, one of the border campaigns. He wanted me to understand what war actually looked like. Draven turned to look at her. I saw a lot of things that day, she continued. Dead soldiers, wounded horses, a village that had been burned to the ground. But what I remember most was watching the commanders argue over maps while men died 100 yards away. They were so focused on strategy, they forgot about the cost. She met his eyes. Don't make me watch you forget the cost tonight. The vulnerability in her voice hit him harder than any blade. This wasn't his war strategist talking. This was the woman who'd been standing beside him for 3 years, watching his back, keeping him alive, pretending she didn't care if he lived or died. Except she did care. And so did he. Draven crossed the room, stopped in front of her. I won't forget, he said quietly. I promise. She looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them moved. For a moment, the war and the rebellion and the empire all faded, leaving just the two of them in a room full of weapons and unspoken words. Then bells began ringing across the palace. Alarm bells. The sound cut through the night like a scream. Draven spun toward the door, hand on his sword. What? Fire, Serafina said, moving to the window. Look, he joined her. Below, in the western courtyard, flames climbed the decorative pavilion. Servants ran with buckets. Guards shouted orders. Chaos bloomed like a flower. It's a distraction, they both said at the same time. Then the main door to his chambers exploded inward. Not opened, not breached. Exploded, wood splintering across the floor in a shower of fragments. And through the smoke and destruction came figures in black, armed and moving with lethal precision. 6 of them. No, 8. More flooding through behind. Draven drew his sword, muscle memory taking over. Serafina moved beside him, twin daggers in her hands, falling into a defensive stance he recognized from a dozen training sessions. The assassins didn't hesitate. They attacked as a unit, coordinated and professional. This wasn't some desperate noble hiring thugs. This was military precision. The first one reached Draven in 3 steps. He sidestepped the blade, countered with his own, felt steel bite flesh. The assassin went down, but 2 more were already there. He parried, turned, slashed at exposed armor joints, kept moving because stopping meant dying. Beside him, Seraphina fought like something wild. She was smaller, faster, using the assassin's momentum against them. A blade flashed toward her. She redirected it into another attacker. Someone grabbed her arm. She broke the hold with vicious efficiency and drove her dagger under their ribs. They moved together like they'd choreographed it. Draven covering her high, Seraphina covering his blind spots. 3 years of working side by side turned into combat synchronization. But there were too many. An assassin broke through, blade aimed at Draven's heart. He twisted, felt steel graze his ribs, pain blooming hot and sharp, countered with a slash that opened the attacker's throat, kept fighting because stopping meant bleeding out. Then he heard Seraphina scream. He spun. An assassin had her arm, blade pressed to her throat. Her eyes were wide, furious, fighting even with steel against her skin. Time slowed. Draven saw the angle, saw the distance, saw what would happen if he hesitated. He threw his knife. It took the assassin in the eye socket, dropping him instantly. Seraphina tore free, grabbed the fallen blade, spun back into the fight without pause. More assassins poured through the door. Where the hell were his guards? Then he heard steel on steel in the hallway. Shouting. His people fighting back. Reinforcements coming. The remaining assassins realized it too. They fell back, moving toward the destroyed door with the same precision they'd entered. One of them paused, looked directly at Draven, and spoke. The prophecy is true. The king dies by the woman he crowns. Then they were gone, melting into smoke and chaos. Draven stood there, bleeding, breathing hard, trying to process what he'd just heard. Behind him, Seraphina collapsed against the wall, still holding her blade, eyes wild. What prophecy? She gasped. Before he could answer, Cain burst through the doorway with a dozen guards, weapons drawn, too late to help. They stared at the carnage, bodies on the floor, blood on the walls. A king and his strategist still standing, barely. Your Majesty, Cain started. Secure the palace, Draven cut him off. Every entrance, every room, I want every noble accounted for and locked in their quarters. Now! The guards scattered. Cain remained, staring at the destruction. They were waiting for the fire, he said quietly. They knew our response protocols, knew exactly when your chambers would be least defended. Inside job, Seraphina said. Had to be. And they had a message. Draven repeated the words, feeling them settle like ice in his chest. The king dies by the woman he crowns. Silence. Heavy and terrible. It's a warning, Seraphina said finally. They're telling you that choosing a queen will get you killed. Or a threat, Cain countered. They're telling you that whoever you choose becomes the weapon they use against you. Draven looked at Seraphina, at the blood on her hands and the fire in her eyes, and the way she was still standing despite everything. And he realized with absolute clarity what the prophecy meant. Not that his queen would betray him, that loving anyone in an empire built on blood and power was the greatest vulnerability of all. Because the woman he wanted to crown was the woman standing beside him. And if the rebels knew that, she'd just become the most valuable target in Valor. The silence after violence always felt heavier than the violence itself. Draven stood in the wreckage of his chambers, breathing hard, ribs screaming where the blade had grazed him. Blood dripped from his sword onto imported carpet that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Around him, 8 bodies lay in positions that told stories of how they'd died. Fast, brutal, necessary. Seraphina leaned against the wall, still gripping her dagger, chest rising and falling like she'd just run a mile. Her sleeve was torn, blood seeping through fabric. Not her blood, he hoped, but the way she held her arm told him otherwise. You're hurt, he said. So are you. That's not an answer. She looked at him, eyes still wild from combat adrenaline, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with strategy or empire or survival. Something raw and honest and terrifying. I'll live, she said finally. The guards were everywhere now, swarming through the royal wing like ants whose hill had been kicked. Cain barked orders, organizing the chaos into something resembling security. Morgesa appeared from somewhere, her face tight with fury that her intelligence network had failed to predict this. But Draven's attention stayed on Serafina, on the blood staining her shirt, on the way her hands shook slightly before she clenched them into fists, on the fact that she'd nearly died tonight because she'd refused to leave his side. The prophecy is true. The king dies by the woman he crowns. The assassin's words echoed in his skull like a death sentence. Your Majesty. A young guard approached, nervous as hell. We've secured the wing, no other breaches. The fire in the western courtyard is contained. Casualties? 3 servants, 2 guards. The guard swallowed hard. They were killed before the alarm was raised. We think that's how the assassins got through the lower corridors. So they'd murdered his people to create their opening. Butchered servants who'd done nothing except work in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rage settled cold and vicious in Draven's chest, the kind that didn't burn hot but froze everything it touched. Remove the bodies, he said quietly. All of them. The servants get a proper funeral with full honors. The assassins get burned. Yes, Your Majesty, and find out who they worked for. I want names. The guard fled. Kane moved closer, lowering his voice so only Draven could hear. 4 of the assassins are marked. Same tattoo as the spy we found. Broken crown on the inner wrist. Professional killers, Your Majesty. Expensive ones. Which means someone with serious money funded this. Draven watched the guards work, cataloging details. Someone who thought 8 professional assassins could do what 15 years of war couldn't. They almost did, Kane said grimly. If Lady Valhart hadn't been here. But she was. Both men looked at Serafina. She'd moved to the window, staring out at the palace grounds like she was trying to calculate angles and entry points even now. Always strategizing, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always in danger because of him. I want her protected, Draven said, too low for her to hear. 24-hour guard rotation. No one gets close without my explicit permission. She won't agree to that. I don't care if she agrees. Make it happen. Kane nodded, understanding what Draven couldn't say out loud. That the woman standing by the window had just become the most valuable piece on the board. That whoever was orchestrating this rebellion would go after her next, either to eliminate her or use her as leverage. That Draven would burn the Empire to ash before he let either happen. Serafina turned from the window. We need to talk. Alone. Kane took the hint, gestured for the remaining guards to clear out. Within minutes, they were alone again, surrounded by destruction and the lingering smell of blood. She walked to him, each step deliberate, stopped close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way pain tightened her jaw, the absolute fury radiating from her like heat. What prophecy? She said. Not a question, a demand. Draven had no idea, but the assassin had known it, had thrown it at him like a weapon designed to cut deeper than any blade. I don't know, he admitted, but whoever sent them believes it. They believe choosing a queen will get you killed. She crossed her arms, winced at the movement. So they're trying to kill you before you can choose, which means they're afraid of what happens if you actually follow through. Or they're trying to manipulate me into not choosing at all. He moved to the broken door, studying the damage. Keep me isolated. Make me paranoid about trusting anyone close to me. It's working, isn't it? He looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? You just told Kane to put guards on me. She stepped closer, anger flashing. Don't deny it. I heard you. You're going to lock me down like I'm some fragile noble daughter who can't defend herself. You nearly died tonight. So did you. Her voice rose. That's the job, Draven. We work in a world where people try to kill us. Adding guards doesn't change that. It just advertises that I'm important enough to be worth protecting. You are important enough. Then treat me like your strategist, not your possession. The word hung between them like an accusation. Draven felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd been maintaining between what he felt and what he allowed himself to acknowledge. You think that's what this is? He closed the distance between them, using his size like the threat it was. You think I'm trying to own you? I think you're an alpha king who spent 15 years taking what he wants and destroying what he can't have. She didn't back down, meeting his intensity with her own. And I think you're looking at me right now like I'm something you want to take. The air between them crackled with tension, electric and dangerous. Draven could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the adrenaline still pumping through both their systems, could feel the magnetic pull that had been building for 3 years finally reaching critical mass. "And what if I am?" he said quietly. Serafina's breath caught. For just a moment, her control wavered. For just a moment, he saw vulnerability in her eyes that she'd never shown before. Then she stepped back, breaking the moment. "Then you need to decide if you want a queen or a strategist. Because I can't be both." "Why not?" "Because queens are political tools. They smile and produce heirs and stay out of the way while men make decisions." She gestured at the carnage around them. "Is that what you want from me? To shut up and look pretty while your empire burns?" "No. Then what do you want?" The question was a trap. He knew it. Every answer led somewhere dangerous. But standing in the ruins of an assassination attempt, bleeding and exhausted and done with pretending, Draven decided he didn't care. "I want you exactly as you are. I want your mind, your strategy, your brutal honesty. I want you standing beside me when I make decisions, not locked away in some safe room for your own protection." He moved closer again, deliberate. "I want to crown you because you're the only person in this empire I actually trust, not because it's politically convenient. And I want to stop pretending I don't think about you every goddamn day." The silence that followed felt like falling. Serafina stared at him, something breaking across her face. Fear, maybe, or desire, or the terrifying realization that they'd just crossed a line neither of them could walk back from. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Nothing about this is fair. I'm trying to keep you alive. Trying to keep both of us alive. And you just..." Her voice cracked. "You can't say things like that." "Why not? It's true. Because it makes everything harder." She turned away, hand pressed to her wounded arm. "Because I have to make tactical decisions about your safety without factoring in how I..." She stopped. Didn't finish. Draven waited, heart pounding. "Without factoring in how I feel about you," she finished quietly. There it was. The admission neither of them had been willing to make. 3 years of tension and unspoken desire and professional distance shattered in one sentence. Draven crossed to her, caught her shoulder, turned her to face him. Her eyes were bright, angry, scared in a way he'd never seen before. "How do you feel about me?" he said. "Like this is a terrible idea. Like we're going to get each other killed. Like I should walk away right now before this destroys everything we've built." "But you're not walking away." "No." She met his eyes, defiant even in vulnerability. "I'm not." He kissed her. Not gently, not carefully. With 3 years of hunger behind it, with the adrenaline of survival still pumping through his veins, with the knowledge that they might both die tomorrow, so today was all they had. Serafina made a sound against his mouth, surprise or surrender, then kissed him back just as fiercely. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, giving as good as she got. No hesitation. No pretense. Just raw want that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his chest. "This is a mistake," she said. "Probably. We're in the middle of a rebellion. We should be planning, not this. We can do both." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think I can strategize with a clear head now? After that? I think you can do anything." He tilted her chin up, making her look at him. "And I think we've wasted 3 years pretending we don't want each other. I'm done pretending. Even if it gets us both killed?" Even then. Her eyes searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. She wouldn't find any. Draven had made his decision, consequences be damned. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but we do this my way. Which is secret. For now." She pulled back, putting professional distance between them, even as her eyes stayed warm. "The court can't know. Your enemies can't know. We maintain the public facade until we understand who's orchestrating this rebellion and what they want. You want to lie to everyone. I want to keep you alive long enough to actually crown someone. If they think you're considering other options, they'll show their hand trying to position their candidates. If they think you've already chosen me, they'll kill us both before the festival." It was good strategy, brutal and calculating and entirely correct. He hated it, but he understood it. In a world where information was currency and vulnerability was death, hiding their connection made tactical sense. "Fine," he said. "Secret. For now." "For now," she agreed. "Then we figure out who's trying to kill you, and we end them. Together." Something shifted in her expression, soft and fierce at once. Together. The moment stretched between them, private and profound. Then reality crashed back in as Cain knocked on the destroyed doorframe. Your Majesty, we've identified 2 of the assassins. The news isn't good. Draven stepped away from Seraphina, professional mask sliding back into place. Report. One is from House Mordain, the other is from House Sterling. Cain's expression was grim. Both houses have daughters attending the festival. Both have been positioning themselves as potential queen candidates. So either they're working together, or someone's trying to frame them both, Seraphina said. Or it's worse than we thought, and half the noble houses are already committed to this rebellion. Cain looked between them, reading the tension in the room without commenting. Lord Marshal suggests we arrest the heads of both houses immediately. And start the civil war tonight? Seraphina shook her head. No. Let them think they still have cover. Let them think their assassins might have succeeded, and we're too confused to connect the pieces. She's right, Draven said. We go public with arrests now. We force everyone's hand before we're ready. Better to let them make the next move while we watch. Risky. Everything's risky. Draven moved to the window where Seraphina had stood earlier, looking out at the palace grounds. At least this way we control the board. Cain nodded reluctantly. What about your chambers? You can't stay here. Move me to the Western Tower. The old king's suite. It's defensible, isolated, and no one knows I'm relocating. And Lady Veilheart returns to her own quarters under guard. Draven didn't look at Seraphina, keeping his voice neutral. With her father. Publicly, she was here because of the fire alarm and got caught in the attack. Nothing more. Understood. Cain left to make arrangements. Alone again, Seraphina spoke quietly. The Western Tower. That's where your father died. I know. You sure you want to sleep there? I'm not planning on sleeping. He turned to face her, saw the worry in her eyes, the fear she was trying to hide behind strategy. She understood what moving to his father's death chamber meant, that he was making himself bait, that he was daring his enemies to come finish what they'd started, that he was absolutely done playing defense. Be careful, she said. That's your advice? Be careful? Someone has to say it. He crossed to her one more time, pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Then her mouth, slower this time, a promise rather than an explosion. When he pulled back, her eyes were closed. 3 weeks, he said. We survive 3 weeks, expose the conspiracy, crown you in front of the entire empire, and dare anyone to challenge it. And if we don't survive, then we go down fighting, together. She opened her eyes, and he saw his own determination reflected back at him. Together, she agreed. Assist. The days that followed moved like a countdown to execution. Draven relocated to the Western Tower, a suite of rooms that hadn't been occupied since his father's death 15 years ago. The old king had died here, poisoned by a rival faction during the succession wars. Draven had found the body himself, 18 years old and already learning that power meant everyone wanted you dead. Fitting that he'd come back to the same rooms now, facing his own assassination plots. He threw himself into preparation. Meetings with Cain to coordinate security, sessions with Morgesa to analyze intelligence, war councils that ran until dawn, planning for every possible scenario. And through it all, Seraphina was there, standing beside him like she'd always been, their secret burning between them like a brand. In public, they were professional, cold even. She called him Your Majesty with perfect formality. He addressed her as Lady Veilheart without inflection. They maintained distance, avoided eye contact, gave no indication that anything had changed. In private, it was different. She came to his tower 3 nights after the attack, moving through the palace shadows like a ghost. Knocked once. He opened the door, pulled her inside, kissed her before either of them could speak. They didn't talk much those nights. There wasn't time for words when survival was measured in days, and every moment together felt stolen. Instead, they communicated in touches and breathless sounds and the desperate need to feel alive while death circled closer. But afterward, tangled together in sheets that smelled like violence and desire, they planned. House Mordain is definitely involved, Seraphina said on the 4th night, tracing patterns on his chest. Morgesa tracked 3 separate meetings between Lord Mordain and unknown contacts in the lower city. all in locations his normal retinue wouldn't go. Unknown contacts or hidden nobility? Could be either. She shifted, propping herself on one elbow to look at him. The problem is everyone has unknown contacts right now. The festival has brought in merchants, entertainers, fortune tellers, foreign dignitaries. Half the city is strangers. So we're looking for a needle in a stack of needles. Essentially. Draven ran his hand down her spine, feeling her shiver. What's your instinct? Who's running this? Someone smart. Someone patient. Someone who understands that attacking you directly is suicide, so they're building a coalition instead. Her voice went thoughtful, analytical. Someone who knew about your queen announcement before you made it public, which narrows the field to people in that throne room meeting, or people those people talked to afterward. So anyone. She laughed quietly. Yeah. Anyone. They lay in silence for a while, the comfortable quiet that came from years of working together. Outside, the palace slept. Beyond that, an empire unaware of how close it was to collapse. Tell me about the prophecy, Seraphina said finally. I told you. I don't know what it means, but you're worried about it. He was. The assassin's words haunted him. The king dies by the woman he crowns. It could be literal. Whoever he named queen would betray him. Or metaphorical. The act of choosing a queen would create the vulnerability that killed him. Or misdirection. Something meant to paralyze him with fear. All he knew for certain was that the prophecy had been weaponized. Whispered at the moment of attack, calculated to plant doubt in his mind about anyone he might trust, including the woman currently naked in his bed. I'm worried you believe it, he said quietly. Seraphina went still. What? The prophecy. I'm worried you think choosing you will get me killed, that you'll use it as an excuse to push me away. She was silent for a long moment. Then she sat up, turning to face him fully. Her hair was a mess, her skin marked from his hands, her eyes absolutely serious. Listen to me. If choosing me gets you killed, it won't be because of some prophecy. It'll be because your enemies use me as leverage, because I'm the vulnerability they exploit, because loving someone in your position is a tactical weakness that can be weaponized, so you agree it's a weakness. No. She leaned down, kissed him slowly. I think it's a strength they're afraid of. I think a king who has someone he trusts absolutely is more dangerous than a king standing alone. And I think they're trying to isolate you by making you fear connection. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. Her brutal honesty made him smile despite everything. This was why he wanted her. Not because she was beautiful or brilliant or deadly, though she was all three, but because she saw the world clearly, without illusion or sentiment, and still chose to stand beside him. So what's your tactical assessment? He said. How do we turn this weakness into strength? We use it. Her eyes gleamed. They think the prophecy will make you afraid to choose. So we choose anyway. We do it publicly, defiantly, and we dare them to make their move. When they do, we're ready. That's insane. That's war. She traced his jaw with one finger. You said you wanted to go down fighting. This is fighting. By making you a target. I'm already a target. At least this way, I'm bait with teeth. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. You understand what you're agreeing to. If I crown you, half the empire will want you dead. Half the empire already wants me dead for being too influential. She shrugged. This just makes it official. And if the prophecy is real, if something about crowning you actually does get me killed, then you'll die knowing you made your own choice instead of being manipulated by fear. Her voice softened. I'd rather have that than watch you isolate yourself trying to stay safe. Safe kings don't build empires, Draven. Dangerous ones do. God, he loved her ruthless pragmatism, and her absolute refusal to pretend the world was kinder than it was. Loved that she understood power in ways no one else did. Loved that she was just as willing to burn for this as he was. He pulled her back down, kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. She responded with equal hunger, and for a while they forgot about prophecies and rebellions and the fact that everything might end in blood. Later, as dawn started creeping through the windows, she dressed in silence, pulled on the dark clothes she'd arrived in, secured her weapons, transformed back into Lady Valhart, war strategist and noble daughter. Before she left, she turned back to him. 2 weeks until the festival. We need to finalize our plans. I know. And Draven? She hesitated at the door. Whatever happens, don't regret this. Don't regret choosing me. He got out of bed, crossed to her, tilted her chin up for one last kiss. Never, he said. She left through the shadows, and he stood alone in the tower that had killed his father, feeling like he'd just signed both their death warrants. Worth it, he thought. Completely worth it. The turning point came 9 days before the festival. Draven was in a war council when Morgessa burst in, protocol forgotten, face white. We have a problem. She slapped a document on the table. A big one. The room went silent. Duke Valhart, Kane, Seraphina, and 3 other advisors stared at the paper. What is it? Draven said. A letter. Found in Lord Mordain's private chambers after one of my agents broke in last night. Morgessa's hands shook slightly. It's addressed to someone called the Architect, and it details the entire rebellion. Seraphina snatched the letter, read rapidly, face going paler with each line. Oh, hell. Share with the rest of us, Draven said tightly. She looked up, and he saw genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. It's not just the noble houses. It's coordinated with the Shadowlands. The silent border? The lack of raids? They're massing for a full invasion timed to the festival. While we're dealing with internal rebellion, the Shadowlands hit us from the north. The Empire fights itself while external enemies tear us apart. The room erupted, voices overlapping, advisors shouting strategy and panic in equal measure. Kane was already on his feet, calculating military responses. Duke Valhart looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Draven held up a hand. Silence fell. How confirmed is this? The letter is genuine, Morgessa said. The intelligence matches reports from our northern scouts. Increased Shadowlands activity, troop movements, resource buildup. It's happening, Your Majesty. It's all happening. Timeline? 9 days. Maybe less. The letter says the signal is your festival announcement. Once you name a queen, the rebellion moves and the Shadowlands invade simultaneously. So choosing a queen triggers the trap, Seraphina said quietly, and not choosing one doesn't stop it, just delays the timing. Kane's voice was grim. They've already committed. We're just deciding when it happens. Draven moved to the map on the wall, studying Vaelor's territories. If the Shadowlands invaded from the north while noble houses rebelled in the south and east, the Empire would be fighting a 3-front war. Divided forces, broken supply lines, chaos. They'd planned this perfectly. Who's the architect? He said. Unknown. Morgessa pulled out another paper. But the letter references someone with the initial E who has access to palace intelligence, someone inside your inner circle. Everyone looked at each other. The temperature in the room dropped. E? Duke Valhart said slowly. Evelis. Duchess Evelis. Draven felt pieces clicking into place. The widow who'd offered him her niece, the woman with connections to the Iron Territories, the noble house that had gone quiet right when they should have been most active, the one who'd warned him to be careful who he trusted, throwing suspicion on Seraphina. Deflection, Seraphina said, following his thoughts. Make you suspicious of me while she coordinates everything. It's elegant. It's treason. Kane's hand was on his sword. We arrest her now, tonight. No, Draven and Seraphina said together. Everyone stared at them. Draven met Seraphina's eyes across the table, saw her thinking the same thing he was. If we arrest Evelis now, the architect role passes to someone else, and we lose our chance to expose the full network. Exactly, Seraphina said. We know who she is. We know what she's planning. We use that. How? Duke Valhart demanded. We feed her false information. We make her think we're unprepared. And when the rebellion moves, we're ready with a counterstrike that takes out the entire leadership at once. That's insane, someone said. That's warfare, Kane countered, understanding dawning. We turn their coordination against them, let them commit to their attack, then crush them all simultaneously. But the Shadowlands invasion, an advisor started, gets met by forces we've already repositioned, Draven finished. We've known for weeks the northern border was too quiet. We start moving troops now, quietly, under the guise of festival security. By the time the invasion launches, we have a full defensive line waiting. And the noble houses? Duke Valhart asked. Get exactly what they want. Draven smiled, cold and vicious. A queen announcement at the festival. Maximum visibility, maximum chaos. Except instead of chaos, they get a trap. Silence fell as everyone processed the plan. It was audacious, borderline suicidal, required perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake and the empire collapsed. It was also their only chance. Seraphina, Draven said, work with Cain. I want detailed scenarios for every house we suspect, where they'll position forces, how they'll move, when they'll strike. I want counter strategies ready. Already on it, she said. Morgessa, keep feeding Evelise information that makes us look vulnerable. Make her think we're scrambling. Let her think she's winning. The spymaster nodded. Duke Veilheart, I need the loyalist houses prepared for full military mobilization. Don't tell them why yet. Just have them ready. Understood. And someone get me a list of every person in this palace with the initial E. Staff, nobility, servants, everyone. The room cleared, advisors scattering to their tasks. Within minutes, only Seraphina remained, studying the captured letter. 9 days, she said quietly. 9 days to prepare for the biggest gamble of my reign. Not just your reign. She looked up. If this fails, I'm dying beside you. I know. Good. She folded the letter carefully. Because I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of hiding. And I'm tired of pretending this empire isn't worth burning the world for. Something fierce and primal surged in Draven's chest. The alpha bond, maybe. Or just recognition that he'd found someone who matched his intensity, his willingness to stake everything on one throw. Tell me what you need, he said. You. She crossed to him, took his hands. I need you to trust me completely for the next 9 days. Trust that I can coordinate this without getting us killed. Trust that choosing me isn't weakness. I've never thought it was weakness. Then prove it. Her eyes burned. Announce me. At the festival. Not as strategy, not as bait. As your choice. Your queen. You know what that means. I know exactly what it means. She lifted her chin. I'm done being your secret, Draven. I'm done being the woman you hide in towers. Either I'm your partner in this or I'm not. The challenge in her voice made his blood sing. This was the woman he wanted beside him. Not careful or cautious. Fierce and uncompromising and willing to burn. Then that's what I'll do, he said. 9 days from now, I announce you to the entire empire, and anyone who doesn't like it can try to stop me. She kissed him, hard and claiming, then pulled back with fire in her eyes. 9 days, she repeated. Let's end this. What? The final week before the festival was controlled madness. Draven moved through the palace like a warlord preparing for siege, which was exactly what he was doing. Meetings with military commanders, secret repositioning of troops, quiet conversations with loyalist nobles who would hold the line when chaos erupted. And through it all, the festival preparations continued. Decorations went up, musicians rehearsed. The great ballroom transformed into something magnificent and deadly, beauty concealing the battlefield it would become. Duchess Evelise played her part perfectly. She attended every court function, smiled with perfect grace, positioned her niece as the obvious choice. And all the while, Morgessa's spies watched her send messages to unknown contacts, coordinating pieces of a rebellion she thought was invisible. The captured letter had revealed enough to connect most of the conspiracy. House Mordain was providing funds. House Sterling was offering military support. House Blackridge controlled strategic trade routes. And Evelise tied it all together, the architect orchestrating an empire's collapse with elegant precision. She was brilliant, patient, ruthless. She was going to lose. 3 days before the festival, Draven called her to a private audience. She came dressed in emerald silk, beautiful and poised, bowed with perfect courtesy. Your Majesty, how can I serve? I wanted to discuss your niece, Draven said. Her qualifications. Evelise's smile sharpened. I'm honored you're considering her, Your Majesty. House Stonereach would be deeply committed to supporting your reign. Committed how? Resources. Military force. Political alliances. She leaned forward slightly. And loyalty, Your Majesty. True loyalty. The kind that doesn't question orders. The kind that does what I tell it. Exactly. He studied her, seeing the calculation behind her eyes. She thought she was negotiating, Thought she could position her niece on the throne and control the empire through her. Thought Draven was weak enough to accept a puppet queen. She had no idea she was already dead. I appreciate the offer, Duchess. I'll make my final decision at the festival. Of course. She stood, graceful. And Your Majesty? I hope you'll consider carefully who you trust. These are dangerous times. The warning was brazen. She was still trying to plant suspicion about Serafina even now, still playing the game. I always consider carefully, Draven said softly. That's why I'm still alive. She left and he sat alone in the audience chamber, feeling cold satisfaction. 3 days. 3 days until he burned her world down. That night, Serafina came to his tower earlier than usual. Something's wrong, he said immediately. She paced, agitated in a way he'd never seen before. I'm missing something, some piece of the puzzle. I can feel it. What piece? I don't know. That's the problem. She turned to face him. Everything adds up too perfectly. The captured letter, the identified conspirators, Evelise's role. It's all there, wrapped up with a bow. You think it's a trap? I think we're seeing what someone wants us to see. Her eyes were troubled. What if Evelise isn't the architect? What if she's a decoy? Someone visible enough to draw attention while the real coordinator stays hidden. Then we're walking into exactly what they want. Yes, they stared at each other, the implications settling like ice. 2 days, Draven said. We have 2 days to figure out if we're being played. I'll dig deeper. Review everything again, look for what we missed. She moved to him, pressed her forehead to his chest. But Draven? If I'm wrong, if Evelise is the architect and we move against her at the festival, then we win. Or we start a civil war based on incomplete intelligence. He lifted her chin, made her look at him. Do you trust your analysis? Usually. Right now? I don't know. Then we go with our instincts. We proceed as planned. And if we're wrong, we adapt. She nodded, but he could see the doubt eating at her. This was what made her good, the constant questioning, the refusal to accept easy answers. But it was also what could destroy her, second-guessing until paralysis set in. He kissed her, slow and deep, until some of the tension left her shoulders. We're going to survive this, he said, both of us. Promise? Yes. He had no idea if he could keep that promise, but he'd die trying. Mkich. The day before the festival, everything accelerated. Kane reported that northern forces were in position, disguised as routine patrols but ready to counter a Shadowlands invasion. The loyal houses had mobilized their personal guards, prepared to move on Draven's signal. The palace security was tighter than it had ever been. Every entrance watched, every guest vetted. They were as ready as they'd ever be. That afternoon, Duchess Evelise requested another audience. Draven almost refused, but something about the timing made him curious. The day before the festival, hours before everything exploded. What was she playing at? He received her in the throne room, public and formal. Serafina stood behind his chair, stone-faced. Duke Valhart attended, along with Kane and several other advisors. Witnesses for whatever was about to happen. Evelise entered alone, moving with the same grace as always, but something was different. Her smile was sharper, her eyes colder. She looked like a woman about to win. Your Majesty, she bowed, perfect and mocking. I've come to offer you one final gift before tomorrow's festivities. I'm listening. The truth. She straightened, and her expression was pure venom. About the woman standing behind you. The room went silent. Everyone stared. I don't know what you're implying, Duchess, Draven said carefully. Don't you? Evelise pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. Then perhaps you should read this. A letter from Lady Valhart to an unknown contact in the Shadowlands, dated 6 months ago, detailing palace defenses and troop movements. She threw the letter. It landed at the base of the throne, damning and impossible. It's a forgery, Serafina said immediately. Obviously. Is it? Evelise's smile was triumphant. Or have you been playing both sides from the beginning, Lady Valhart? Advising the king while selling intelligence to his enemies? Making yourself indispensable while positioning yourself for maximum leverage? That's insane, Duke Valhart said, face red. My daughter is loyal. Your daughter is ambitious. Evelise turned to Draven. Tell me, Your Majesty, have you considered why she's pushed so hard for you to choose a queen? Why she's been so insistent on accelerating your decision? Perhaps because she wants to make sure she's crowned before her treachery is exposed. Draven felt rage building in his chest, cold and vicious. This was the play. The final move. Not killing him directly, but destroying Serafina's credibility. Turning him against the one person he trusted. Isolating him at the moment when he needed her most. It was brilliant. It was also too late. That's an interesting theory, Duchess. He descended from the throne, picked up the forged letter, examined it. Very elaborate. Professional forgery work. Expensive. Your Majesty, Evelise started. Tell me something. Draven walked toward her, each step deliberate. How did you know I was planning to choose Lady Valhart? I never said it publicly, never confirmed it to anyone. She hesitated. The court has eyes, Your Majesty. People see things. What people? Who told you I was considering her specifically? The silence stretched. Evelise's confidence wavered just slightly. Because the only people who knew were in my inner circle, Draven continued. The people at my war councils. The advisors I trust. Which means either you have a spy in my council, or you are the spy, Serafina finished from behind him. Evelise's face went white. You've been feeding us information to seem helpful, Draven said quietly. You've been positioning yourself as the loyal voice of reason while orchestrating a rebellion. And when none of that worked, you created a forgery to turn me against my strategist. Because you knew that if you couldn't kill me, isolating me was the next best thing. Evelise started. Morgesa stepped from behind a pillar, along with 6 guards. The spymaster held up another letter, this one genuinely captured. We found the original correspondence in your private chambers last night, Duchess. After we finished decoding your messages to the Shadowlands, House Mordain, and a dozen other conspirators. Her smile was vicious. You've been sloppy, Architect. Very sloppy. Evelise's composure shattered. Her hand went to her belt, where she probably had a weapon. But Cain was already there, blade to her throat, ending that option. You're under arrest for treason, Draven said. High treason. Conspiracy to commit regicide, coordination with foreign enemies, and attempted manipulation of the crown. This isn't over, Evelise hissed. You think arresting me stops anything? The houses are committed. The Shadowlands are coming. Tomorrow night, everything burns whether I'm in chains or not. I know. Draven smiled coldly. I'm counting on it. Her eyes widened as understanding hit. Take her to the tower cells, he ordered. Full guard. No visitors. They dragged her out, still struggling, still spitting threats. The throne room doors closed behind her, and silence fell. Well, Cain said finally. That was dramatic. That was necessary, Serafina countered. She looked at Draven. You knew she'd make a move. I knew she'd panic. He returned to the throne, feeling exhausted. We've been feeding her false information for days, making her think we were unprepared. She came here to destroy your credibility as a last-ditch effort to divide us, and instead walked into a confession. Duke Valhart was pale, but satisfied. One problem solved. One, Serafina agreed. But she was right about one thing. The rebellion is still coming. Arresting the architect doesn't stop the houses who've already committed. They'll move tomorrow whether she's there to coordinate or not. Then we stick to the plan, Draven said. We let them come. And we end this. The night before the festival, Draven couldn't sleep. He stood at his tower window watching the palace grounds transform. Lanterns hung from every tree. Red silk draped every surface. The great ballroom glowed with light, already prepared for tomorrow's announcement. His announcement. Serafina had been in meetings all evening, finalizing last details with Cain and Morgesa, positioning forces, confirming loyalties, making sure that when chaos erupted, they'd be ready to contain it. She finally arrived past midnight, exhausted and worried. Everyone's in position, she said, collapsing into a chair. Northern forces are ready for the Shadowlands. The loyalist houses know to watch for our signal. The palace guard is briefed. We're as prepared as we can be. But we're still guessing. We know Evelise was coordinating. We know which houses are involved, but we don't know exactly when or how they'll move. We're reacting, not controlling. That's war. She looked at him and he saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, the kind she'd never shown before. I don't want to lose you, she said quietly. Not tomorrow. Not ever. and I'm terrified that all our preparation won't be enough. Draven crossed to her, pulled her up, held her close. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I'm crowning you. Not as bait, not as strategy, as my choice, my queen. Even if it fulfills the prophecy, especially then. He pulled back enough to see her face. Because I'd rather die having chosen you than live without you. That's not tactics. That's truth. Tears shone in her eyes, quickly blinked away. You're an idiot. Probably. A reckless, dangerous idiot who's going to get us both killed. Definitely. She kissed him, fierce and desperate, and they stumbled toward the bed without breaking contact. Made love like tomorrow might be their last day. Which it might be. Afterward, tangled together in darkness, she spoke against his chest. When you announce me tomorrow, the court will explode. Half of them will be outraged. They'll see it as an insult to their houses, a political disaster. Good. She laughed softly. Only you would see scandal as an advantage. It is an advantage. It forces them to react. The guilty ones will move too fast. The loyal ones will hold steady. And we'll know exactly who's who. And if the prophecy is real? If announcing me triggers something we can't stop, then we face it together. She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly, he almost didn't hear it. I love you, you know. I've loved you for 2 years, and I've never said it because it seemed weak. But if tomorrow is the end, I don't want you dying without knowing. His chest tightened. 2 years? 2 years. Since the siege of Northwatch. You broke the blockade in 3 days when everyone said it would take 3 weeks. Came back covered in blood and exhausted, and instead of celebrating, you spent the night reviewing supply reports to make sure the civilians had enough food. Her voice was thick. I looked at you and thought, this is a man who actually cares about more than just winning, and I've been yours ever since. Draven felt something crack open in his chest, some last wall he'd been holding against vulnerability. He'd spent 15 years building an empire on strength and fear, had never let himself want anything he couldn't take or protect. But here was Seraphina, offering him something he couldn't force or defend with swords. Trust, love, partnership, the most dangerous things of all. I love you too, he said. And tomorrow, the entire empire is going to know it. She tilted her head up, kissed him slow and deep. Then let's make sure we survive to enjoy it. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, knowing that in 12 hours everything would change, for better or worse. Victory or death. Together. Okay. The Crimson Moon Festival dawned bright and merciless. The ballroom glittered like a throat waiting to swallow them whole. Draven stood at the edge of the grand hall, watching 300 nobles flood through the entrance in waves of silk and jewels and ambition. The Crimson Moon Festival had begun, and with it, the countdown to civil war or victory. He couldn't tell which yet. The decorations were magnificent. Red lanterns hung from vaulted ceilings, casting everything in crimson light that made the marble floors look like rivers of blood. Musicians played in the gallery, elegant and haunting. Servants moved through the crowd with trays of wine and delicacies imported from across the empire. It looked like celebration. It felt like a funeral. Beside him, Cain stood in full ceremonial armor, hand never far from his sword. The Lord Marshal's eyes tracked every noble, every servant, every shadow that moved wrong. Somewhere in the crowd, Morgesa's spies circulated, watching for signals and suspicious movement. The loyal houses had positioned themselves strategically throughout the hall, ready to move when chaos erupted, because it would erupt. The only question was when. Your Majesty. Duke Valhart approached, looking older than his years. Everything is prepared. The announcement platform is ready. The guards are in position. He paused, voice dropping. My daughter is ready. Draven nodded. He'd seen Seraphina earlier, dressed in midnight blue that made her look like a warrior queen already. She'd been in the war room until an hour ago, reviewing final contingencies with Cain. Now she was somewhere in this crowd, playing her role as a noble daughter, while preparing for battle. The thought of her in danger made something primal surge in his chest, the alpha bond screaming at him to find her and protect her. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not until the moment he'd planned for. Not until he announced her as his choice and dared the Empire to challenge it. Movement at the entrance caught his attention. House Mordain arriving, Lord Mordain looking nervous as hell despite his formal smile. Behind him, House Sterling, their military contingent noticeably larger than protocol allowed. House Blackridge, House Heron, all the suspected conspirators walking into his palace like they owned it, like they thought they were about to. And conspicuously absent, Duchess Evelise, currently locked in a tower cell, her carefully constructed rebellion falling apart without its architect. Or so they thought. Draven felt unease crawl up his spine. Seraphina's words from yesterday echoed in his head. Everything adds up too perfectly. What if we're seeing what someone wants us to see? He pushed the doubt down. They'd arrested Evelise. They'd intercepted her communications. They knew the plan. All they had to do was survive the next few hours, and this would be over. All they had to do was not die. Simple. Your Majesty. Kane's voice was tight. We have a problem. What problem? The Shadowlands. Our scouts just sent word. The invasion force isn't at the northern border. Draven went cold. What do you mean it isn't there? I mean, our entire defensive line is positioned for an attack that isn't coming. Kane pulled him aside, voice dropping to barely a whisper. The troop movements we saw? Misdirection. The real invasion force is somewhere else. Where? Unknown. But Your Majesty, if we positioned all our northern forces to counter a phantom invasion, then we left other borders exposed, Draven finished. Son of a bitch. This was the real trap, not the noble conspiracy, not Evelise's coordination. Those were visible threats designed to draw his attention and his forces north. While everyone watched the obvious play, the real danger was coming from somewhere else, somewhere they'd left vulnerable. Seraphina, Draven said. Find her, now. Already sent runners, Kane said. But Your Majesty, the announcement happens as planned. If we cancel now, we show weakness. We let them know we've figured out the deception. He gripped Kane's shoulder. We proceed. We watch. And we pray we're fast enough to adapt when the real attack comes. Kane nodded grimly and disappeared into the crowd. Draven returned to his position, mind racing. A phantom invasion, misdirected forces, which meant someone in his intelligence network had fed them false information about Shadowland's positioning. Someone who knew exactly how his military would respond. Someone close enough to manipulate his war councils. The unease became dread. The ballroom doors closed. The music faded. Every eye turned to the throne platform where Draven stood, waiting for the announcement that would either save or destroy the Empire. He ascended the platform, alone and exposed, feeling like a target. People of Valor, he began, voice carrying across the hall. Tonight marks the Crimson Moon Festival, a tradition older than this empire, a time of renewal, of legacy, of choosing the future. The crowd watched, hungry and calculating. He could feel their ambition like a physical weight. I stand before you as your king, as I have for 15 years. I have led you through war, through conquest, through the forging of an empire that stands unmatched in strength and territory. He paused. But an empire is not one man. It requires succession. It requires legacy. It requires a queen. Whispers rippled through the hall. This was it, the moment they'd all been waiting for. Draven scanned the crowd, looking for Seraphina. Spotted her near the eastern pillars, standing with her father, face carefully neutral. Their eyes met across the distance. He saw fear there, and determination, and love that she couldn't quite hide. He made his choice 3 years ago, had just been too stubborn to admit it until someone tried to kill them both. I choose... The explosion was deafening. Not in the ballroom, somewhere close. The palace shuddered. Screams erupted as nobles scattered. Guards rushed toward the sound, weapons drawn. Chaos bloomed like fire. Draven's first instinct was Seraphina. He found her in the crowd, saw her fighting toward him, dagger already in hand. Relief flooded through him until a second explosion rocked the western wall. Then a third. Fourth. Multiple breaches, coordinated strikes hitting the palace from different directions simultaneously. This was it. The rebellion wasn't waiting for his announcement. They were attacking now, before he could name a queen, before he could solidify any alliance. They were trying to kill him in the chaos. Kane appeared at his side, blood on his armor. Your Majesty, we need to move you to... A section of the ballroom ceiling collapsed. Marble and timber crashed down onto screaming nobles. People ran in every direction, trampling each other in panic. The elegant celebration became a slaughterhouse in seconds. Through the dust and destruction, figures in black armor poured through the breaches. Not assassins this time. Soldiers. A full military assault on the palace itself. Draven drew his sword. Around him, his guards formed a protective circle, but they were outnumbered. The attackers moved with precision, cutting through palace security like wheat. This wasn't a rebellion. This was an invasion. Seraphina reached him, breathing hard. She had blood on her face, not hers. Her eyes were wild with realization. "It's not the Shadowlands," she gasped. "Look at their armor. Those are Iron Territory marks. The invasion is here, in the palace. They've been inside the whole time." Draven's blood turned to ice. The Iron Territories. The eastern border. The direction no one was watching because all attention had been on the north and the internal conspiracy. Evelise had corresponded with the Iron Territories. They'd known that, but they'd thought she was seeking external support for a noble rebellion. They'd been wrong. This wasn't a rebellion supported by foreign powers. This was a foreign invasion using the rebellion as cover. The noble conspirators were never the main threat. They were pawns, distractions, cannon fodder to occupy attention while the real army positioned itself inside the palace, inside his home. "How many?" Draven demanded. "Unknown." Seraphina's tactical mind was already working, but they breached 4 locations simultaneously. That's at least 200 soldiers, maybe more, and they're between us and our armory. Then we fight with what we have. He turned to Kane. "Get the nobles to the eastern wing. Lock it down. Anyone who can fight, arm them. Everyone else, protect them. Your Majesty, you need to evacuate. I need to kill whoever organized this." Draven's voice was cold. "Find me Lord Mordain. Find me every conspirator in this room. Someone let these soldiers in. Someone gave them palace schematics. Someone betrayed us all." The attack intensified. More soldiers poured through the breaches. The palace guard fought back viciously, but they were scattered, disorganized. Noble houses that had secretly aligned with the rebellion found themselves under attack too. Their conspiracy turned into a weapon against them. Chaos. Pure chaos. Exactly what an invasion needed. Draven fought like the warlord he'd been before the crown. His sword found flesh, opened throats, painted the marble floors red. Beside him, Seraphina moved like death itself, all her strategic brilliance converted into lethal efficiency. And Kane held the center, rallying guards and loyal nobles into a defensive formation. But they were losing ground. "Your Majesty!" A messenger stumbled through the fighting, half his face burned. "The northern tower is overrun. The western armory is lost. The Iron Territory forces control half the palace." "How is that possible?" Draven snarled. "How did an army get into my palace without anyone seeing it?" The messenger's face was full of despair. "They've been here for weeks, Your Majesty, disguised as servants, as entertainers, as festival workers. They've been positioning themselves the entire time. Weeks. While Draven had been chasing conspiracies and arresting architects, an entire invasion force had been embedding itself in his palace, sleeping in his servant quarters, walking his halls, learning every vulnerability, and someone had coordinated it. Someone with access to palace layouts and security rotations and guard schedules. Someone in his inner circle. Seraphina reached the same conclusion at the same moment. Her face went white. "Oh gods," she whispered. "It's not Evelise." What? Evelise was the distraction, the visible threat. We were meant to arrest her, meant to think we'd won. Her voice shook. While we were focused on the architect, the real coordinator kept working. Someone we never suspected. Who? Before she could answer, a voice cut through the chaos. Clear and cold and terribly familiar. "I believe she's talking about me." Everyone turned. Duke Valhart stood on the remains of the announcement platform, sword in hand, surrounded by a dozen Iron Territory soldiers. Seraphina's father, the old duke who'd served the Empire for 30 years, who'd brought his daughter to court as a strategist, who'd sat in every war council, who'd had access to everything. "No," Seraphina breathed. "No, that's not—" "I'm afraid it is, daughter." The old duke's face was sad but resolute. "Did you really think I'd let you bind yourself to this tyrant? Let you waste your brilliance serving a king who rules through fear and violence?" You did this. Seraphina's voice cracked. You let them in. You coordinated everything. I saved the Empire. Valhart descended the platform slowly, soldiers protecting his flanks. Draven Kalor is a warlord, not a leader. He's held power through brutality and conquest. The Empire deserves better. You deserve better. So you sold us to the Iron Territories? Draven's rage was cold, absolute. You betrayed your own kingdom? I negotiated a transition of power. The old duke's voice was calm, reasonable. The Iron Territories will absorb Valor peacefully. No more wars, no more bloodshed. And you, daughter, will be offered a position of genuine authority, not as some king's concubine, but as a recognized leader. Seraphina looked like she'd been stabbed. You don't get to make that choice for me. You were making the wrong choice. Valhart's expression hardened. I watched you fall in love with him, watched you compromise everything you are to serve his ambitions. I couldn't let it continue. The betrayal was complete, elegant, devastating. While everyone had been watching Evelise and the noble conspirators, Duke Valhart had been feeding the Iron Territories' palace intelligence, had positioned their soldiers as festival workers, had created the Phantom Shadowlands threat to misdirect forces, had arrested Evelise himself when she'd gotten too close to figuring it out. He'd played them all perfectly, and he'd done it to save his daughter from a king he believed was destroying her. The worst kind of betrayal, the one that came from love. Father, Seraphina said, and her voice was broken. Please don't do this. It's already done. Valhart gestured, and more soldiers emerged from side passages. 100, 200, the palace was swarming with them. Your king is finished. Surrender now, and I promise you won't be harmed. Either of you. Draven looked at the overwhelming force surrounding them. At the palace guards scattered and dying. At the loyal nobles trapped in the chaos. At Seraphina, standing beside him with tears streaming down her face and murder in her eyes. At the empire he'd built, collapsing because he'd trusted the wrong person. No, he said quietly. Your Majesty, be reasonable. I said no. Draven raised his sword. I don't surrender. I don't negotiate with traitors, and I don't let foreign powers take what's mine. The old duke sighed. Then you die. He raised his hand, preparing to signal the final assault. Wait, Seraphina said. Everyone stopped. She stepped forward, away from Draven, toward her father. Her face was unreadable. Seraphina, Draven said, warning in his voice. She ignored him, looked only at her father. You said I deserve a position of genuine authority. That you did this for me. I did. Then give me a choice. Her voice was steady now, cold. Stand down. Call off the attack. Let the Iron Territories withdraw. And I'll walk away from him. I'll renounce any claim to the throne. I'll serve the Empire in whatever capacity you think is best. The offer hung in the air like poison. Draven felt his heart stop. She was negotiating, trading herself for the Empire, offering to give up everything they'd built together if it would end the bloodshed. No, he said. She still didn't look at him. Do we have a deal, father? Duke Valhart studied his daughter. The calculation was visible on his face. If Seraphina renounced Draven publicly, the king's position became impossible. His chosen queen, rejecting him. His closest strategist, walking away. The symbolic victory would be nearly as valuable as military conquest. We have a deal, the old duke said finally. Stand down and come with me. The king lives. The Iron Territories withdraw. Valor remains intact under new leadership. Seraphina, don't, Draven said, desperation creeping into his voice. Don't do this. She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were empty. I'm sorry, she said. I can't watch you die. Not for me. Not for this. Then she crossed the space between them, and everything happened at once. Her dagger flashed. Draven jerked back on instinct. The blade missed him by inches, and buried itself in Duke Valhart's throat. The old duke's eyes went wide with shock. Blood poured between his fingers as he clawed at the weapon. He tried to speak. Couldn't. Collapsed. Seraphina stood over her father's dying body, face carved from ice. There's your choice, she said. Then she turned to the Iron Territory soldiers. Your commander is dead. His deal is void, and if you don't withdraw immediately, the king's forces will slaughter every one of you. It was a bluff. They didn't have the forces. The palace was still overrun, but Seraphina spoke with such absolute authority that several soldiers actually hesitated. That hesitation was all Kane needed. The Lord Marshal's signal rang out across the ballroom, and from hidden passages came the reserve forces, the ones they'd positioned as a final contingency. Not enough to win, but enough to make the cost of victory devastating. The Iron Territory soldiers saw the trap, saw that taking the palace would require killing every defender, destroying every room, turning victory into Pyrrhic slaughter. Some started to retreat. Others held position, looking for orders from a commander who was bleeding out on marble floors. The standoff lasted 10 seconds. 20. An eternity. Then horns sounded from outside the palace. Not invasion horns, reinforcement horns, the northern forces. Kane had recalled them. They'd been marching since yesterday, racing back from the phantom threat. And now they were here, thousands of soldiers surrounding the palace, cutting off any retreat. The Iron Territory invasion was trapped. Their choice was surrender or die. One by one, weapons hit the floor. The invasion was over, and Serafina stood in the center of carnage, her father's blood on her hands, looking like something had broken inside her that would never heal. The aftermath was brutal. The Iron Territory soldiers were disarmed and imprisoned. The noble conspirators who'd survived the attack were arrested. The palace became a fortress, every room secured, every entrance guarded. The Crimson Moon Festival ended in blood and betrayal, exactly as prophecy had predicted. But the king was alive. Draven moved through the wreckage mechanically, making decisions and issuing orders while something cold and dead settled in his chest. Duke Veilheart's body was removed, along with dozens of others. The death toll was catastrophic. Nobles, guards, servants, people who'd come to celebrate and ended up dying in someone else's war. And through it all, Serafina was silent. She'd withdrawn into herself the moment her father stopped breathing. Stood in the ballroom like a statue, blood drying on her hands, eyes empty. When Morgessa tried to lead her away, she'd allowed it without resistance. No emotion, no reaction, just gone. Draven wanted to go to her, wanted to hold her and tell her it wasn't her fault and that they'd survived this together. But he had an empire to save first. The war councils reconvened at dawn, exhausted men and women trying to process what had happened. The Iron Territories had attempted a stealth invasion. They'd been repelled, but barely. The political implications were staggering. This was an act of war by a foreign power. It demanded response. Veilheart coordinated everything, Morgessa reported, her voice hollow. He'd been in contact with Iron Territory Command for over a year, feeding them intelligence, positioning their forces. The noble rebellion was real, but he manipulated it to serve as misdirection. Evelise suspected him near the end. That's why he had her arrested, using evidence he'd planted himself. The perfect crime, Kane said bitterly. Use a real conspiracy as cover for the actual threat. We never saw it because we were looking at the wrong enemy. He did it for his daughter, Draven said quietly. Thought he was saving her by destroying everything she'd built. Morgessa shook her head. He didn't understand her at all. The irony was vicious. Duke Veilheart had betrayed the Empire to protect Serafina from a king he thought was corrupting her, had coordinated an invasion to give her a way out, had offered her authority and freedom and safety. And she'd killed him for it. Because she'd chosen Draven over everything, over family, over safety, over her father's love. She'd made her decision and there was no walking it back. The cost was everything. What happens now? Kane asked. With the Iron Territories? War, most likely. Draven rubbed his face, exhausted beyond measure. They invaded. We repelled them. But they'll try again, and now we have to fortify against a threat we'd underestimated. And internally? Internally, we're fractured. Half the noble houses were part of the conspiracy. The ones who weren't are terrified. Trust is gone. Unity is gone. He looked at his remaining advisors. We won the battle, but the Empire is bleeding. What about Lady Veilheart? Morgessa asked carefully. What's her status now? Draven was silent. He didn't know. She'd killed her father to save him, had committed patricide in front of the entire court. Some would call her a hero. Others would call her a kinslayer, cursed and untouchable. All he knew was that she'd sacrificed everything, and he hadn't been able to stop her. I need to see her, he said. Your Majesty, she's not... Morgessa started. I need to see her. He found Serafina in the Western Tower, the same rooms where they'd spent secret nights together. She stood at the window, staring out at dawn breaking over the city, still wearing the blood-stained dress from last night. She didn't turn when he entered. "Serafina," he said quietly. Nothing. He crossed to her, stood beside her, followed her gaze. The city was waking, unaware of how close they'd come to conquest. Smoke still rose from damaged sections of the palace. Bodies were still being removed. But life continued, indifferent to tragedy. "I killed my father," she said finally. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I looked him in the eye and I killed him. You saved the empire. I killed my father." Draven didn't know how to respond. Because she was right. Whatever tactical necessity justified it, whatever strategic brilliance it demonstrated, she'd still committed an act that would haunt her forever. And she'd done it for him. "He didn't ask for this," she continued, still staring at nothing. "He just wanted to protect me. Wanted to give me a life that wasn't serving a king he thought was destroying me." Her voice cracked. "And I murdered him for it. He was a traitor. He was my father." Both things were true. Both things were unbearable. Draven reached for her, pulled her against his chest. She came without resistance, without fight, just collapsed into him like her strings had been cut. "I don't know how to survive this," she whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore." "You're Serafina Valhart." His voice was rough. "You're the woman who saved my life a dozen times, who built strategies that held an empire together, who made impossible choices because someone had to. I'm a kinslayer." Her shoulders shook. "I'm cursed. You're mine." The words came out fierce, possessive, and he meant them. She'd burned her own world down to save his, had chosen him over blood, over family, over everything. That kind of loyalty, that kind of sacrifice demanded recognition, demanded claim. She pulled back enough to look at him. Tears tracked through the dried blood on her face. "I can't be your queen now. You know that. The court will never accept me. Not after this." "I don't care what they accept. Draven, be realistic." "No." He cupped her face, made her see him. "I'm done being realistic. I'm done calculating political advantages and worrying about court opinion. You killed your father to save me. You chose this empire over everything, and I'm not letting that sacrifice be for nothing." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm crowning you anyway. Today. In front of everyone who's left. I don't care if it's scandalous. I don't care if it causes more chaos. You earned that crown in blood, and I'm putting it on your head." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. "That's insane," she said. "That's love." The word hung between them, raw and honest. "I love you," Draven continued. "I've loved you for years. I'm not hiding it anymore. I'm not pretending it's strategy or political necessity. I'm crowning you because you're the only person in this empire I trust completely. The only person I want beside me. The only person I'd burn the world for. And if the prophecy is real, if crowning me gets you killed, then I die." He pulled her closer. "But I die having chosen you, having made my own decision instead of being controlled by fear. That's worth any cost." Serafina closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling over. "You're going to destroy us both," she whispered. "Probably." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "But at least we'll burn together." She kissed him back, desperate and broken, and they held each other in the ruins of everything they'd built, knowing that the hardest part was still coming. Because crowning a kinslayer as queen wouldn't just cause scandal. It would start another war. And this time, they'd be fighting their own people, their own nobility, their own empire turning against itself. But standing there with Serafina in his arms, blood and tears and love tangled together, Draven made his choice. He'd crown her. He'd fight for her. He'd dare the empire to stop him. And if the prophecy claimed his life in the process, at least he'd die for something that mattered. At least he'd die for her. The coronation happened at noon in the damaged ballroom that still smelled like smoke and death. Word spread through the palace like fire. The king was crowning his strategist, the kinslayer, the woman who'd murdered her own father in front of the court. Every noble who'd survived the invasion was summoned. Attendance wasn't optional. They came, sullen and shocked, filling the space with hostile energy. Some faces showed outrage. Others showed fear. None showed support. Draven didn't care. He stood before the throne in full ceremonial armor, crown on his head, looking every inch the warlord he'd always been. Beside him, Cain and Morgesa represented what remained of his inner circle. The palace guard lined the walls, armed and ready for violence. Because there would be violence. This coronation would either solidify his rule or destroy it completely. No middle ground left. The ballroom doors opened. Serafina entered alone. She wore white, traditional coronation color, but stark and simple. No jewels, no ornamentation, just clean lines and cold fabric that made her look like a warrior preparing for execution. Her hair was pulled back severely. Her face was composed, empty of emotion. She looked like she'd accepted death. The crowd murmured ugly sounds of disapproval and horror. A kinslayer, walking toward the throne like she deserved it. The insult to tradition was staggering. Draven watched her cross the ballroom, each step measured, and felt pride surge through him. She was terrified, shattered, probably wanted to run, but she kept walking, kept her head high, refused to show weakness. That was his queen. She reached the throne platform, knelt, formally, head bowed. The silence was absolute. Draven spoke, voice carrying across the hall. Serafina Valhart. 3 years ago, you came to my court as an advisor. You gave me counsel, strategy, truth. You stood beside me through war, conspiracy, and invasion. Last night, you made an impossible choice. You killed your own father to save this empire from conquest. The crowd stirred, hostile energy building. Some will call you cursed. Some will call you traitor. Some will say you're unworthy of honor or position or trust. He descended the steps, stopped in front of her. I call you hero. I call you savior. I call you the most loyal subject this empire has ever known. He drew his sword, not to threaten but to formalize. The ceremonial blade, used for coronations and oaths, placed it gently on her shoulder. Serafina Valhart, I name you Queen of Valor, Empress of the Realm, my partner, my equal, my choice. He lifted the sword, moved it to her other shoulder. Any who object will answer to me personally. The challenge was clear, direct. Draven was daring anyone to speak against her, daring them to question his judgment, putting his crown on the line for her. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The crowd seethed with barely controlled rage, but no one challenged him openly, because challenging the king meant death. And Draven had just made it clear he'd kill anyone who threatened her. He extended his hand. Serafina took it, stood. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was fierce. He placed the crown on her head. Smaller than his, but equally ornate. The symbol of ultimate authority. Serafina Valhart was queen, and the empire exploded. Not physically, not yet. But the moment the crown touched her head, the carefully controlled hostility shattered. Nobles began shouting. Accusations flew. Traitor. Murderer. Abomination. The ballroom descended into chaos. House Mordane's representatives stormed out, followed by a dozen others. House Sterling's lord stood, face purple with rage, screaming about tradition and honor. House Blackridge's delegation called for Draven's abdication. The empire was fracturing in real time. Cain moved to the throne platform, hand on sword, ready to defend against physical attack. But the nobles weren't attacking yet. They were just leaving, one by one, walking away from a king who'd chosen personal desire over political wisdom, walking away from an empire they no longer recognized. Within minutes, half the ballroom had emptied. Draven and Serafina stood alone before the throne, crowned and abandoned, watching their support collapse. The prophecy was fulfilled. The king had crowned a woman, and in doing so, he'd signed his own death warrant. Not through assassination, through isolation, through the slow death of legitimacy as his own people rejected him. Serafina turned to him, crown heavy on her head, and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. What have we done? Draven looked at the empty ballroom, at the nobles who remained, sullen and hostile, at the empire on the verge of civil war, at the woman beside him, crowned and cursed in his. Survived, he said, for now. But they both knew the truth. The real war was just beginning, and this time the enemy wasn't foreign invaders or ambitious conspirators. It was the empire itself, turning against its king for the sin of loving the wrong woman. The Alpha who'd conquered kingdoms through strength and violence had finally found a battle he couldn't win with swords. He'd found the one thing that could destroy him, the choice between power and love. And he'd chosen love. The cost would be everything. The rebellion came 3 days after the coronation. Not quietly, not with political maneuvering or careful conspiracy. It came with fire and steel, and the rage of noble houses who'd decided their king had finally gone too far. Draven stood on the palace battlements at dawn, watching smoke rise from the southern districts. House Sterling had risen first, declaring the coronation illegitimate and Seraphina's crown an abomination. Within hours, House Mordain joined them, then Blackridge, then a dozen smaller houses coordinating their moves like the conspiracy had never been broken at all. Because it hadn't been broken. Duke Veilheart's betrayal and death had only delayed the inevitable. The noble houses still wanted power, still resented being ruled by a warlord king, and crowning a kinslayer as queen had given them the excuse they needed to move openly. Civil war. The thing he'd spent 3 weeks trying to prevent. Happening anyway. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying everything. Cain joined him on the battlements, exhausted and grim. Sterling has 1,500 men marching on the capital. Mordain has another 1,000 blocking the western supply routes. Blackridge is mobilizing but hasn't committed forces yet. He paused. They're calling themselves the Restoration Coalition, claiming they're saving the Empire from tyranny. They're calling me a tyrant for choosing my own wife. Draven's voice was flat. That's rich. They're calling her a murderer. Cain's expression was carefully neutral. A kinslayer who corrupted the king. Some are saying she used witchcraft to bind you. Others claim she's been manipulating you for years. Let them talk. Your Majesty, this isn't just talk. 3 noble houses have declared open rebellion. More will follow. We're outnumbered, and the capital's vulnerable. He hesitated. We need to consider options. What options? Surrender? Abdicate? Draven turned to face his Lord Marshal. Send my queen into exile to appease men who'd knife me in the back the moment I showed weakness? I'm saying we need to think tactically about, I am thinking tactically. And tactically, the only way to end this is to crush them so completely that no one ever questions my authority again. That's not tactics. That's pride. No. Draven leaned on the stone battlements, watching his empire tear itself apart. That's survival. The moment I compromise, the moment I show any weakness, 50 other houses will rise. I have to make this so brutal, so absolute, that even thinking about rebellion becomes suicide. Even if it means destroying half the empire? Even then, Cain was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, accepting what they both knew. This war would be fought without mercy, without quarter, without the restraint that made civilization possible. Because Draven had finally found something more important than the empire. He'd found something worth burning it for. Your orders? Your Majesty, mobilize everything, every soldier, every guard, every able body. We march on Sterling first, fast and brutal. Make an example so vicious that Mordain and Blackridge reconsider. And the Queen stays here, protected. Draven's voice went hard. No one touches her. Anyone who tries dies screaming. Understood. Cain left to execute the orders. Draven remained on the battlements, watching dawn break over a capital, preparing for war. Somewhere below, Seraphina was in the strategy room, coordinating defenses and logistics, despite the crown that marked her as a target. She'd thrown herself into work the moment the coronation ended, using tactical planning like armor against the reality of what she'd become. A queen without support, a crown built on blood and defiance, a symbol of everything the nobility hated, and she carried it like it weighed nothing at all. Draven felt that familiar pull in his chest, the alpha bond that had been screaming at him for 3 days to go to her, protect her, keep her close. But she'd asked for space, asked for time to process what she'd done, what she'd become. And he'd given it to her because even in the middle of civil war, her needs mattered more than his instincts. That was love, he was learning. Not the dramatic speeches or grand gestures, but the quiet act of respecting someone's pain, even when every fiber of your being wanted to fix it. Even when there was no fixing what had been broken. Movement in the courtyard below caught his attention. A rider, coming fast, barely staying in the saddle. One of Morgesa's scouts, by the look of him. He dismounted badly, stumbled toward the palace entrance, clearly carrying urgent news. Draven descended from the battlements, meeting the scout in the main hall. The young man was covered in road dust and dried blood, gasping for breath. Report, Draven commanded. Your Majesty. The scout swallowed hard. The Iron Territories. They're mobilizing again. Full invasion force, 10,000 strong, marching on the eastern border. Draven felt ice settle in his stomach. When?
3 days, maybe less. They're moving fast, taking advantage of the civil unrest.
The scout's face was pale. Your Majesty, if they hit us while we're fighting Sterling and Mordain, we'll be fighting on 3 fronts. Draven finished the thought, mind already calculating impossible logistics. How confirmed is this? Morgessa verified it personally. She sent me ahead with the warning. The main report is coming by secured courier. Find Lord Marshal Kane. Tell him we have a new priority. The scout fled. Draven stood alone in the hall, feeling the walls close in. A 3-front war. Rebel nobles in the south and west. Foreign invasion from the east. His forces already stretched thin defending the capital. This wasn't just difficult. This was designed to be unwinnable. Someone had coordinated this. Even with Duke Veilheart dead, someone was still pulling strings, timing the noble rebellion to coincide with another Iron Territory offensive, forcing Draven to choose between defending against external enemies or crushing internal ones, forcing him to sacrifice something. Footsteps behind him. He turned to find Seraphina still wearing yesterday's clothes, eyes red from lack of sleep. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. Information found her the way blood found wounds. The Iron Territories are moving, she said. Not a question. Yes. And Sterling's rebellion is 3 days from the capital. Yes.
So we can't fight both.
We have to choose. She crossed her arms, that analytical mind already processing scenarios. If we march on Sterling, the eastern border falls and the Iron Territories invade unopened territory. If we defend the east, Sterling takes the capital and we lose everything anyway. There's a third option, which is we split our forces. Send Kane east with enough soldiers to hold the border. I take the rest south and crush Sterling before they reach the city. That's suicide. Seraphina's voice was sharp. You'll be outnumbered 3-1. Sterling, Mordain, and whatever houses join them. Even you can't win those odds. Watch me. This isn't about pride, Draven. This is about survival. She moved closer, frustration and fear warring in her expression. If you die leading a reckless assault, the Empire collapses completely. Everything we've fought for, everyone who died, it's all for nothing. And if I don't fight, if I hide behind walls while my enemies destroy everything, that's not survival. That's slow death. Then we negotiate. Find terms Sterling will accept. Buy time to... No. His voice cut like a blade. No negotiations. No compromises. I will not legitimize their rebellion by treating them like equals. Even if refusing gets you killed, even then. They stared at each other. The fundamental difference in their approaches finally impossible to ignore. Seraphina saw the world through strategy and calculation, always looking for the tactical advantage. Draven saw it through strength and will, believing that force applied decisively could solve any problem. Both approaches had merit. Both had kept them alive this long, but now they were pulling in opposite directions. You're being stubborn, Seraphina said quietly. I'm being a king. You're being an alpha who thinks he's invincible. She stepped closer, voice dropping. I know what you are, Draven. I know you've won every battle, survived every assassination attempt, conquered every enemy. But this is different. This isn't external conquest. This is your own people turning against you, and you can't just kill your way out of civil war. Why not? It worked before you crowned me. Her voice cracked slightly. Before you gave them a reason to unite against you. This rebellion exists because of me, because you chose me over political stability, and I'd choose you again. The words hung between them, absolute and uncompromising. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Then you're choosing wrong, she said. You should abdicate. Name a successor from one of the loyalist houses. End this war before it destroys everything. No. Draven, please. I said no. He caught her shoulders, made her look at him. I will fight Sterling. I will crush this rebellion. I will defend the eastern border and repel the Iron Territories. And I will do it all while you wear that crown. Because I'm done compromising. Done calculating political advantages. Done pretending that power matters more than this. Then what? Then you. The confession was raw, honest, Everything he'd been holding back for 3 days. Serafina stared at him like he'd stabbed her. You can't mean that. I mean every word. The Empire exists to serve my will, and my will is that you stay queen. He pulled her closer. Everything else is negotiable. That isn't. She broke then, not crying, not quite. But something shattered in her expression, some last wall between control and devastation. She pressed her forehead to his chest, shoulders shaking. You're going to get yourself killed, she whispered. Probably. And I'm going to have to watch it happen. No. He lifted her chin, made her see him. You're going to lead the defense while I'm gone. You're going to coordinate with Cain and Morgesa. You're going to hold this city against anything that comes. Because you're not just my queen. You're the most brilliant strategist I've ever known. And I trust you to keep my empire intact while I'm tearing our enemies apart. Understanding dawned in her eyes. He wasn't sidelining her. He was giving her command, giving her the responsibility of defending everything while he went to war. It was trust, absolute and terrifying. How many soldiers are you taking? She asked. 2,000, enough to move fast. Against 5,000 rebels. Those are terrible odds. I've fought worse. Not lately. Not since... She stopped, calculating. Not since you became king. You've been leading from strategy rooms and war councils. When's the last time you actually led a charge? 15 years. Her face went pale. Draven, you're not that man anymore. You're older, slower. And the men you're fighting? They're desperate. Desperate men fight like demons. Then I'll fight like something worse. He kissed her forehead. Trust me. I do. That's what terrifies me. They held each other in the empty hall, knowing this might be the last time. Knowing that in a few hours, he'd march south and she'd stay behind, and there was a very real chance they'd never see each other again. That one of them would die. Or both. That the prophecy would finally claim its price. If I don't come back, Draven started. Don't. She pressed her hand over his mouth. Don't say it. Don't make this a goodbye. Serafina, I mean it. You don't get to make this final. You're coming back. We're surviving this, and anyone who says otherwise can go to hell. Her ferocity made him smile despite everything. This was why he loved her, not because she was soft or gentle or easy, but because she was steel wrapped in flesh, refusing to accept defeat even when defeat was inevitable. She made him believe they could actually win. All right, he said, not goodbye, just temporary, very temporary. She kissed him, fierce and claiming, then pulled away before either of them could change their minds. Go kill your enemies, your majesty. I'll keep your empire from burning down. He watched her walk away, spine straight, crown glinting in morning light. She looked like a queen, moved like a warrior, carried herself like someone who'd decided that survival wasn't optional. She was magnificent, and he was about to risk everything to keep her crowned. The march south began at midday. 2,000 soldiers, the core of the palace guard plus whatever loyal forces Draven could mobilize on short notice. It wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. But quantity meant nothing if quality and leadership were superior, and no one doubted Draven's leadership. He rode at the front, mounted on a war horse bred for size and aggression, wearing the armor he hadn't touched in a decade. It felt heavier than he remembered. Age, maybe, or just the weight of everything he was risking. Cain rode beside him, similarly armed. The Lord Marshal had split his attention between tactical planning and watching Draven like he expected the king to collapse. Fair concern, given that Draven was about to fight like he was 25 again when his body was 43 and hadn't seen real combat in years. Your Majesty, Cain said carefully, about the battle plan. We hit them hard and fast before they can coordinate with Mordain. Simple. That's not a plan. That's a death wish. It's both. Draven adjusted his grip on the reins. Sterling expects us to fortify the capital and wait. They're marching slowly, confident. We're going to hit them tonight while they're still on the move, before they set up defenses, before they're ready. A night assault with tired troops against superior numbers. Cain's voice was flat. This gets worse the more you explain it. You have a better idea? Yes? Wait for reinforcements, build up our strength, attack when we have actual odds of winning, and let them get closer to the capital? Let Mordain link up with them and double their forces? No. We move now, or we lose the advantage of surprise. What advantage? They know we're coming. They know we'll respond eventually. They don't know we're already marching. Draven looked at his Lord Marshal. Sometimes the only way to win impossible odds is to do the thing your enemy thinks is too reckless to attempt. That's not wisdom. That's madness. Then I've gone mad. He urged his horse forward. Let's see if it works. The army marched through the day, pushing hard to cover ground. Soldiers grumbled about the pace, but followed anyway. That was the thing about leading from the front. Men would follow a king into hell if he was walking there first, even if hell was exactly where they were headed. Scouts reported Sterling's position by evening. 1,500 soldiers, exactly as intelligence had said, camped 20 miles from the capital. They'd stopped for the night, confident in their numbers and coordination, waiting for Mordain's forces to arrive tomorrow before continuing the advance. They weren't expecting an attack tonight. Perfect. Draven called his commanders together, sketching the assault plan in dirt with a stick. Fast approach. Hit them from 3 sides. Target their command structure first. Break their leadership and the army collapses. It was brutally simple, also brutally risky. Everything depended on speed and violence, overwhelming superior numbers before those numbers could organize. One commander voiced the concern everyone was thinking. Your Majesty, if we fail, we lose everything. No retreat, no fallback position. We'll be slaughtered. Then we don't fail. Draven met each man's eyes. I'm not going to lie to you. The odds are bad. The enemy outnumbers us. We're tired from marching all day. This could go very wrong very quickly. Silence. Soldiers shifted uneasily. But here's what I know. The men we're fighting, they're rebels, traitors. People who betrayed their oaths because they didn't like who I chose to love. They think they're righteous. They think they're justified. They think the Empire will thank them for removing a tyrant. He stood, letting his presence fill the space. Show them they're wrong. Show them what happens to people who challenge this throne. Show them that betrayal has consequences, and show them that I'm still the same warlord who conquered half this empire before they were old enough to hold swords. He drew his blade, held it high. For the Empire. For the crown. For victory or death. The soldiers roared approval, not because they believed they'd win, but because they'd follow their king into the fire and at least die with honor. That's all anyone could ask for in war. To die for something that mattered. The attack began 3 hours before dawn. Draven led the center assault personally, 200 cavalry hitting Sterling's camp like a hammer. They covered the distance at full gallop, horses thundering across dark fields, timing the approach for maximum chaos. The enemy sentries saw them coming with maybe 30 seconds warning, started shouting alarms, tried to rouse sleeping soldiers, failed, because 30 seconds wasn't enough time to organize against a cavalry charge. Draven hit the camp at full speed, sword swinging, horse trampling anyone too slow to move. Around him, his soldiers carved through confused rebels, cutting down men still reaching for weapons. Blood sprayed hot across his face. Bodies fell under his horse's hooves. Screaming filled the night. This was war. Real war. Not the clean tactical exercises he'd been fighting from throne rooms and council chambers. This was violence and terror and the primal rush of survival. And God's help him, he'd missed it. He fought like a demon. Like the warlord he'd been before responsibility and age had tried to civilize him. His sword found throats and hearts with brutal efficiency. His horse crushed skulls and broke bones. He moved through the enemy camp, leaving carnage in his wake. And somewhere deep in his hindbrain, that alpha instinct howled in savage joy. This was what he was built for. Not politics, not diplomacy. Violence applied decisively until problems stopped existing. The rebel forces tried to rally. Officers shouted orders, attempting to form defensive lines. But Kane's flanking forces hit them from both sides simultaneously, collapsing any organized resistance. The camp became a killing field, rebels dying in their tents or fleeing into darkness. Lord Sterling himself made a stand near his command pavilion, surrounded by personal guard. 30 men, well-trained and desperate, forming a shield wall. Draven saw the target, urged his horse forward, directly at the line. "Your Majesty, no!" Kane shouted behind him. Too late. Draven was already committed, charging at the shield wall like physics didn't exist. His horse hit the line at full speed, breaking through by sheer momentum. Men scattered. Sterling's guards tried to regroup. Draven was already among them. He fought dismounted now, trading reach for mobility. His sword moved in tight arcs, professional and lethal. One guard down. 2. 3. Each kill brought him closer to Sterling. Each step through the chaos felt like walking through water, everything slowing down except his blade. Then he was face to face with Lord Sterling himself. The rebel lord was younger than Draven, maybe 30, and terrified. He held his sword like he knew how to use it, but really hoped he wouldn't have to. "Yield," Draven said. "Order your men to surrender and you live." Sterling's face twisted with hate and fear. "You crowned a kinslayer. You chose her over the Empire. You're not fit to rule. Then kill me and take the throne." He held his sword loose, giving Sterling an opening. Deliberately. Because this needed to be definitive. The rebel lord needed to try, fail, and die, knowing he'd had his chance. Sterling attacked, wild and desperate. Draven parried easily, countered with a strike that opened Sterling's shoulder. The lord gasped, stumbled. Draven hit him again, cutting deep into his sword arm. Sterling's blade fell. He collapsed, bleeding and beaten, staring up at his king. "Please," Sterling gasped. "Mercy." Draven looked down at the man who'd raised an army to depose him, who'd called Seraphina an abomination, who'd started a civil war over a marriage, and he felt nothing except cold satisfaction. No mercy for traitors. He drove his sword through Sterling's heart, held it there while the life drained out of the rebel lord's eyes, then pulled the blade free and turned to the remaining guards. "Your leader is dead. Drop your weapons or join him." They dropped their weapons. The battle ended 20 minutes later. Sterling's forces, leaderless and surrounded, surrendered en masse. Some tried to flee into the darkness. Draven let them go. Running survivors would spread word of what happened here. Fear was more useful than corpses. The casualty count came in as dawn broke. Sterling, 800 dead, 700 captured. Draven's forces, 300 dead, another 200 wounded. Brutal losses. But victory nonetheless. Draven stood in the ruins of Sterling's camp, covered in blood and exhausted beyond measure, feeling his age in every joint and muscle. His ribs hurt where someone had landed a hit. His sword arm throbbed. His back screamed from the old injury he'd gotten in the Northwatch siege. He was too old for this. Body couldn't keep up with what his will demanded anymore. But he'd won. That had to count for something. "Your Majesty?" Cain approached, similarly bloodied. Mordain's forces received word of the defeat. They're retreating, breaking the coalition. Good. Draven sheathed his sword, wincing at the movement. "Send word to the capital. Sterling is crushed. The rebellion is broken." "What about the Iron Territories?" Cain's face went grim. "That's the problem. While we were fighting here, they crossed the eastern border. Full invasion force. They're 3 days from the capital now. And we're 3 days south with exhausted troops who just fought a major battle." Draven closed his eyes, doing math that didn't work. "We can't get back in time." "No, Your Majesty, we can't." The implications settled like lead. They'd won the battle against Sterling, broken the noble rebellion. But the cost was position. They were out of place, out of time, unable to defend against the real threat. The Iron Territories would reach the capital first, and Seraphina was there, crowned and vulnerable, commanding a city's defense against an army that outnumbered her 3-1. "How fast can we march?" Draven asked. "Hard march, pushing the men past endurance? 2.5 days. Not fast enough." "No." Draven opened his eyes, staring at the dawn breaking over a field of corpses. He'd made his choice, crushed Sterling decisively instead of defending cautiously, proven his strength instead of preserving his position. And now the woman he loved was about to face an invasion because he wasn't there to protect her. The prophecy whispered in the back of his mind. The king dies by the woman he crowns. Maybe it wasn't literal death. Maybe it was this, being forced to choose between defeating his enemies and saving her. Winning the war but losing everything that mattered. "Your orders," Cain asked quietly. "We march. Now. No rest. No delay. We push the men until they collapse, and then we push harder." He turned to his Lord Marshal. "And we pray Seraphina can hold that city for 3 days. She's one woman against 10,000 soldiers, Your Majesty. She's Seraphina Valhart. She's held worse odds." The confidence in his voice sounded hollow even to him, but he had nothing else to offer except faith. Faith that the woman he'd crowned queen was brilliant enough, ruthless enough, and desperate enough to do the impossible. Faith that she'd survive long enough for him to reach her. Because if she didn't, none of this mattered. Not the victory over Sterling, not the crushed rebellion, not the crown or the empire or anything. Without Serafina, it was all ash. The army began marching north within the hour, exhausted soldiers pushing themselves past human endurance because their king commanded it. They left the battlefield behind, left the dead unburied and the wounded with minimal care, racing toward a capital under siege. Racing toward the woman who'd become more important than the throne itself. And in the capital, 3 days away, Serafina Valhart stood on palace walls watching an army of 10,000 approach from the east, knowing she had 3,000 defenders and no reinforcements coming. Knowing she had to hold this city alone against impossible odds. Knowing that if she failed, her husband died in the field and the empire collapsed completely. She looked at the approaching army, at the Iron Territory banners flying in morning light, at the siege engines and scaling ladders, and everything designed to crack walls and break defenders. And she smiled. Because Serafina Valhart hadn't spent 3 years studying warfare to lose the first battle she commanded. The Iron Territories wanted the capital? Fine. She'd show them exactly why you didn't fight a strategist on ground she'd prepared. She turned to Morgesa, standing beside her with a spy master's cold assessment. How long until they reached the walls? 6 hours. Maybe less. Good. Serafina's voice was ice and steel. Plenty of time to finish preparations. Tell Kane's deputy to position the archers on the eastern battlements, move the cavalry to the southern gates, and bring up those interesting supplies from the underground armory. Morgesa's eyes widened. Your Majesty, those supplies are illegal under 3 different treaties. I know. Serafina met her gaze. We're past worrying about treaties. We're defending against an invasion with 1/3 of the forces we need, so we're using everything. Everything? Everything. Morgesa nodded and disappeared to relay orders. Serafina remained on the wall, watching the Iron Territory army approach like a storm, and felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. She'd killed her father, worn a crown built on blood, become queen of an empire that hated her. She'd already paid every price there was to pay. One more sacrifice wouldn't make any difference. If defending this city meant using weapons that violated every law of civilized warfare, so be it. If holding these walls required tactics that would make her a monster in history books, fine. She'd be a monster. She'd be whatever she needed to be to keep Draven's empire intact until he got back. Because that's what queens did. They held the line when kings went to war. They made impossible choices. They carried the weight of survival on their shoulders and didn't break under it. And when the history was written, they'd be judged for those choices. Serafina accepted that judgment in advance, knew that what she was about to do would stain her crown forever, knew that using forbidden weapons against an invading army was the kind of decision that defined reigns and destroyed legacies. She did it anyway. Because love, she'd learned, wasn't about noble choices or clean hands. It was about surviving, together, no matter what it cost. The Iron Territory army reached the walls at noon, and the siege of Kylor began. The siege lasted 3 days that felt like 3 lifetimes. Serafina stood on the eastern battlements, watching the Iron Territory army batter against walls that had stood for 2 centuries. The siege engines hurled burning pitch and stone. Soldiers threw themselves at the gates with battering rams. Scaling ladders appeared and disappeared as defenders cut them down or pushed them back. The noise was endless, deafening, the sound of an empire trying to break through stone and will. She hadn't slept in 70 hours, hadn't eaten anything except dried meat and water when someone forced it into her hands. Her crown sat crooked on her head, forgotten. Blood from a dozen sources stained her dress. She looked like something that had crawled out of hell's furnace. She felt worse than she looked, but the walls held. Day 1, the Iron Territories threw everything at the eastern gate. Serafina had anticipated that, reinforced it with triple layers of timber behind the stone, positioned archers in overlapping fields of fire. They'd lost 200 defenders, but the gate hadn't broken. Day 2, the enemy tried multiple breach points simultaneously. That was when Serafina authorized the forbidden weapons, the alchemical compounds that burned hotter than normal fire and couldn't be extinguished with water. The screaming from burning soldiers had haunted her dreams, Except she didn't sleep, so the screams just became permanent background noise. Day 3, the Iron Territories settled into systematic bombardment, trying to crack the walls through sheer persistent violence. And through it all, Serafina coordinated defenses like she was conducting an orchestra of death. Archers here, cavalry held in reserve there, civilians evacuated to inner districts, supplies rationed, medical stations established, every detail managed, every crisis handled, every decision made with brutal efficiency because hesitation meant collapse. She'd become what necessity demanded. A queen who led through siege, a strategist who weaponized everything including laws meant to prevent atrocities. A woman who'd already killed her father, discovering she could order the deaths of thousands more without flinching. Power, she'd learned, wasn't about authority or crowns. It was about the ability to make choices that destroyed pieces of your soul and keep functioning anyway. It was about carrying weight that should break you and refusing to fall. It was about becoming something harder than stone because stone could crack and you couldn't afford to. Your Majesty. Morgesa appeared beside her, exhausted and grim. The eastern wall is weakening. Another day of bombardment, and we'll have a breach. Reinforce it. Pull stones from the western fortifications if you have to. We've already stripped the west. There's nothing left to use. Then find something else. Serafina's voice was flat, emotionless. Tear down buildings. Use rubble. We hold this wall or we die. Those are the only options. Morgesa hesitated, then spoke carefully. Your Majesty, there's another option. We could negotiate terms. The Iron Territories want the city intact. They might accept surrender with conditions protecting the population. No. Your Majesty. I said no. Serafina turned to face the spymaster. Draven is coming. He's marching north with whatever forces survived Sterling. He'll be here today or tomorrow. We hold until then. If he arrives to find the city burned and the population slaughtered because we refuse surrender, then he arrives to a wife who kept her vow. She met Morgesa's eyes. I'm not surrendering his capital. I'm not handing his empire to invaders. I don't care what it costs. Even if it costs everything? Especially then. Morgesa studied her queen's face, seeing something there that made her nod slowly. Understanding, maybe. Or just acceptance that arguing was pointless. Serafina Veilhard had made her choice the moment she'd put on that crown. She would hold this city or die trying, and nothing would change her mind. Because that's what love had taught her. That some things were worth any price. That survival without the person you'd chosen was just a slower form of death. That if Draven came back to find she'd surrendered his capital to save herself, the disappointment in his eyes would hurt worse than any blade. So she'd hold. Until the walls crumbled. Until every defender was dead. Until the Iron Territories killed her personally or Draven arrived to save her. Whichever came first. The bombardment intensified as afternoon wore into evening. Serafina moved through the city like a ghost, appearing wherever morale flagged or defenses weakened. Her presence steadied soldiers, reminded them what they were fighting for. Not just territory or politics, but the woman who'd stayed on the walls beside them while nobles fled to safety. The queen who'd used forbidden weapons to protect her people, damning herself to save them. They would die for her. She'd made sure of that through 3 days of shared suffering. She just hoped they wouldn't have to. Night fell. The bombardment paused as darkness made targeting impossible. Serafina used the respite to walk the walls, checking defenses and counting casualties. 3,000 defenders at the start. Maybe 1,800 still standing. The math was brutal. One more day of this intensity, and they'd be overrun through simple attrition. She stood alone on the battlements, staring into darkness, listening to the moans of wounded soldiers and the crackle of fires that wouldn't die. Somewhere out there, 10,000 enemy soldiers camped and prepared for tomorrow's assault. Somewhere beyond them, Draven was marching home, racing against time to save a city he might already be too late to protect. The thought of him finding her dead, crown still on her head, surrounded by the corpses of soldiers who'd followed her orders, made something crack in her chest. Not fear of death itself. Fear that he'd blame himself. That he'd carry guilt for the rest of his life because he'd chosen to crown her and she'd paid the price for that choice. She couldn't let that happen. Whatever it took, she had to survive long enough to see him again. To tell him it was worth it. That she'd do it all again. That loving him had been the one choice she'd never regret even if it cost her everything else. A sound behind her. Serafina turned, hand going to the dagger that never left her belt, and found a young soldier standing there, maybe 19, face pale with exhaustion and fear. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "forgive the intrusion. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what? Leading you into a siege you might not survive?" "For staying." The young soldier's voice shook slightly. Every noble with sense fled when the Iron Territories approached. But you stayed, stood on these walls with us, used weapons you knew would stain your name forever because it might save our lives. That means something. Serafina studied his young face, seeing the desperate hope there, the need to believe their suffering had purpose, that their queen cared about more than politics and power. The truth was complicated. She'd stayed partially because running meant losing Draven's respect, partially because someone had to coordinate the defense, partially because abandoning the city felt like betraying everything she'd sacrificed to become queen. It wasn't pure nobility. It was necessity mixed with pride, mixed with the terrifying realization that she'd become someone who couldn't walk away, even when walking away was smart. But this soldier didn't need complicated truth. He needed something to fight for tomorrow. "You're welcome," she said simply. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder." He saluted and left. Serafina remained on the walls, alone with her thoughts and the weight of tomorrow's choices. She'd used forbidden weapons, led soldiers to die in battles they couldn't win, made decisions that would haunt her for whatever remained of her life, all to hold this city for a man who might arrive too late to matter. And the worst part? She'd do it again. Every choice, every sacrifice, every stain on her soul, because that's what love had made her. Someone willing to become a monster if it meant protecting the person who'd looked at her like she was worth burning the world for. The crown on her head had never felt heavier. Draven's army reached the capital at dawn on the 4th day. They'd marched for 3 days straight, pushing past exhaustion into something beyond human endurance. Soldiers collapsed and were left behind. Horses died from exertion. The 2,000 who'd left Sterling's battlefield arrived as maybe 1,400 stumbling corpses held together by will and desperation. But they'd arrived. Draven saw the smoke first, black columns rising from the capital, then the siege engines surrounding the eastern wall, then the massed Iron Territory forces preparing for what looked like a final assault. 10,000 soldiers against a city that had to be running on fumes by now. He was too late. The attack was already beginning. No time for tactics or careful planning. No time for anything except raw speed and violence. "Kane," Draven said, voice hoarse from 3 days of shouting orders. "We hit their rear, fast and brutal, break their siege and relieve the city." "Your Majesty, we're outnumbered 7 to 1. "I know the math. We do it anyway." Kane looked at his king, seeing a man who'd aged a decade in 3 days, who'd pushed himself past every reasonable limit and was now demanding one more impossible thing from a body that had nothing left to give. And Kane, loyal to the end, nodded. "For the Queen," he said. "For the Queen," Draven agreed. The order passed through the exhausted ranks. Men who could barely stand found the strength to grip weapons one more time. Cavalry who'd been marching on foot because their horses had died somehow found mounts. An army that should have collapsed before reaching the city prepared for one final charge. Because their king commanded it, because the alternative was watching the capital fall, because sometimes the only way forward was through impossible odds with nothing but faith and fury. Draven raised his sword, looking at the Iron Territory army spread before him. Somewhere beyond that mass of soldiers, Serafina stood on walls, holding his empire together through sheer will. Somewhere in that burning city, the woman he loved was fighting alone because he'd chosen glory over caution and left her vulnerable. The guilt would come later. Right now there was only rage. He kicked his horse into motion. 1,400 soldiers followed him down the hill toward 10,000 enemies, and the madness of it would have been funny if it wasn't their last chance at salvation. The Iron Territories saw them coming too late to organize a proper response. They'd been focused on the city walls, preparing ladders and battering rams for the final push. Draven's cavalry hit their rear flank like a thunderbolt, scattering formations and creating instant chaos. Draven fought like he'd fought at Sterling's camp, except more desperate, more vicious. His sword rose and fell in mechanical rhythm, cutting through flesh and bone, painting his armor red. Around him, his soldiers gave everything they had left, knowing this was the moment that defined whether they'd saved their queen or died trying. The Iron Territories tried to turn their forces to face the new threat, but that meant abandoning the siege. And the moment they abandoned the siege, Seraphina's forces poured out of the city gates. Draven saw her through the chaos, and his heart stopped. She was mounted, leading a cavalry charge of her own, maybe 200 riders who shouldn't have had the strength for one more fight, but were doing it anyway. Her crown caught the dawn light. Her sword was dark with blood. She looked like a Valkyrie carved from vengeance and exhaustion. She looked alive. The Iron Territory army found itself caught between two forces, neither large enough to threaten them individually, but together creating a tactical nightmare. Their command structure collapsed. Units tried to defend in multiple directions simultaneously. Coordination became impossible. The siege broke, not through overwhelming force, but through chaos. The Iron Territories hadn't expected relief forces, hadn't prepared for a two-front battle. Their confidence shattered, replaced by the desperate realization that they might actually lose this. And once an army starts believing it might lose, defeat becomes inevitable. The fighting continued for another hour, brutal in close quarters, but the outcome was clear. The Iron Territories retreated, leaving their siege engines and hundreds of dead falling back toward the eastern border in disorganized clusters. Draven let them go. His soldiers didn't have the strength to pursue, and honestly, neither did he. The battle was over. The siege was lifted. The city was saved, and Draven was still alive to see it. He found Seraphina in the aftermath, dismounted and standing among the corpses of soldiers from 3 different armies. Her dress was ruined, her crown sat crooked, blood matted her hair. She looked like she'd been dragged through every level of hell and come out the other side fundamentally changed. She looked at him across 20 feet of battlefield, and something broke in her expression. He crossed the distance, pulled her against him, held her like she might disappear. She collapsed into his chest, not crying but shaking, the adrenaline and terror of 3 days finally crashing over her, now that survival was assured. "I held it," she gasped. "I held the city. You came back." "Always," he said roughly. "I'll always come back." They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd fought separate battles, and somehow both survived. Around them, soldiers began the grim work of counting dead and treating wounded. The city smoldered. The empire was fractured. Victory had cost more than either of them wanted to calculate, but they were alive, together, and that had to be enough. The reconstruction took months, not just the physical damage, though that was extensive. Walls needed repair. Buildings had to be rebuilt. The eastern fortifications required complete renovation, but the deeper damage, the fractures in the empire's foundation, those took longer to address. The noble houses who'd supported Sterling were stripped of lands and titles. Their wealth was redistributed to loyalist houses, shoring up alliances through reward rather than fear. The conspirators who'd survived were given a choice: exile or execution. Most chose exile. A few chose execution out of pride or shame. Draven handled it all with brutal efficiency, making examples where necessary and showing mercy where strategic. He'd learned something in the 3 days of civil war and siege, that power maintained through fear alone eventually collapsed, that an empire needed something more than a strong fist to hold it together. It needed belief, purpose, something people would fight for instead of against. He was still figuring out what that something was. The Iron Territories sued for peace after their invasion failed. The terms were harsh: reparations, border concessions, a 20-year non-aggression treaty enforced through hostages. Draven took everything he could get, making sure they understood that attempting to conquer Valor came with costs too high to bear. It wasn't justice, but it was stability. And right now, stability mattered more. Through it all, Seraphina worked beside him, no longer hiding their partnership, no longer pretending it was just political alliance. She was queen, visibly and undeniably, making decisions and issuing orders with authority that no one questioned anymore. The woman who'd held a city against impossible odds had earned respect even from nobles who'd called her kinslayer. Not forgiveness. Respect and forgiveness weren't the same thing. But it was enough. 6 months after the siege, Draven found her in the palace gardens at sunset. She sat on a stone bench staring at nothing, lost in thoughts she didn't share. He'd been finding her like this more often lately, withdrawn into herself in ways that worried him. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Said nothing, just waited. Finally, she spoke. I killed 3,000 soldiers during the siege, used weapons that burned them alive. Weapons that violated every treaty about civilized warfare. You saved the city. I committed atrocities. Her voice was flat. In 100 years, history will remember me as the kinslayer queen who used forbidden weapons against her enemies. That's my legacy. Draven took her hand, laced their fingers together. History will remember you however we write it, and I'll make sure they know you saved the Empire when I couldn't. That doesn't change what I did. She finally looked at him, and he saw the haunted look that never quite left her eyes anymore. I became something dark to survive. I made choices that stained my soul. And I don't know how to live with that. You live with it the same way I do. He pulled her closer. You acknowledge it. You carry the weight. You accept that power requires sacrifice, and some sacrifices leave scars. And you decide that the alternative, letting good people die because you were afraid to become a monster, would have been worse. Is it worse? I don't know. He was quiet for a moment. I've done terrible things to build this empire, killed thousands, destroyed entire cities, ruled through fear and violence, and I've spent 15 years telling myself it was necessary, that strong kings make hard choices. And now I think maybe I was right. Maybe those choices were necessary, but that doesn't make them good. It just makes them what I was willing to do to achieve power. His voice went rough. And I look at you, carrying guilt for choices you made to save my empire, and I realize I taught you that. Showed you that survival means becoming something you hate. You didn't make me kill my father. No. But I made you love me. And loving me meant standing beside someone who solves problems through violence. Someone who crowns kinslayers and fights civil wars and burns treaties when convenient. You became dark because I was darkness. She pulled away, standing to face him with anger finally breaking through the numbness. Don't you dare blame yourself for my choices. I killed my father because he was a traitor. I used forbidden weapons because I had to hold the city. I did those things, not you. I made those decisions, and you made them for me. Yes. Her voice cracked. I did. I became a monster for you. And I'd do it again because that's what love is. It's not pretty speeches or romantic gestures. It's becoming whatever you need to be to keep the person you love alive. They stared at each other, both broken in different ways, both carrying guilt and power and the weight of impossible choices. Draven stood, crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. I love you. Not despite what you became, but including it. You're not a monster. You're someone who survived, and that's all anyone can do in a world built on blood and power. She closed her eyes, tears finally falling. I miss who I was before. I know, I miss believing I was good. You are good. You're just not innocent anymore. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. Innocence is not knowing what you're capable of. Goodness is knowing exactly what you're capable of and choosing something better anyway. You made terrible choices in terrible circumstances. That doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. She leaned into him, letting him hold her while she cried. Not the desperate tears of battle, but the quieter grief of aftermath. The realization that victory didn't erase cost. That survival didn't mean everything went back to the way it was. That some things, once broken, stayed broken forever. But broken things could still be beautiful, could still function, could still matter. They stayed like that until sunset faded into darkness. Two people who'd burned the world for each other, learning how to live with the ashes. 1 year after the siege, Draven called a grand council. Every major house in the empire sent representatives. Loyalists and former conspirators both, united by the understanding that cooperation was preferable to continued civil war. The palace ballroom, scene of so much violence and betrayal, was restored to magnificence for the occasion. Seraphina stood beside the throne, crowned and regal, looking nothing like the broken woman who'd cried in the garden 6 months ago. She'd learned to carry the weight, learned to function despite the scars, learned that queens didn't have the luxury of falling apart where people could see. She'd become what she needed to be: strong, cold, effective. Draven hated that it was necessary, but he loved her for managing it anyway. He addressed the assembled nobility, voice carrying across the hall. A year ago, this empire nearly tore itself apart. Noble houses rebelled, foreign powers invaded, thousands died in battles that should never have been fought. Silence. Everyone remembered. We survived because people made impossible choices, because soldiers fought when they should have fled, because a queen held a city when surrender would have been easier, because loyalty, for some of you, meant more than ambition. He paused, letting that sink in. But survival isn't enough. An empire built only on survival eventually collapses. We need something more. Purpose, unity, a reason to believe this realm is worth preserving. What reason? Someone called from the crowd. Bold or stupid? Draven smiled slightly. That we're stronger together than divided. That coordinated empires survive when fractured kingdoms fall. That unity isn't weakness, it's the only practical defense against external threats. He gestured to Seraphina. My queen held this city for 3 days against overwhelming odds. She used every resource available, made every tactical choice necessary, and refused to surrender even when surrender was rational. Some of you call her kinslayer. Some call her monster. I call her the reason the Iron Territories don't occupy this capital. Seraphina stood motionless, expression carefully neutral, as Draven continued. She represents something important. That loyalty matters. That sacrifice matters. That sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones, even when they cost everything. And if this empire is going to survive the next century, we need to remember that. He turned to address the full assembly. So here's my offer. Continue serving this throne with genuine loyalty, and you'll find reward, protection, and voice in decisions that shape the realm. Continue plotting rebellion, and you'll find death. Simple terms. It wasn't a speech designed to inspire. It was a speech designed to establish reality. Cooperate or die. Unity or destruction. Power consolidated around a throne defended by a king and queen who'd proven they could survive anything. The nobles accepted it because the alternative was another civil war they'd likely lose. Democracy by exhaustion. Not ideal, but functional. The council ended with new oaths sworn and old grievances officially buried, if not forgotten. Houses that had fought each other weeks ago now pledged cooperation under threat of mutual destruction. It was pragmatic rather than idealistic, held together by necessity rather than trust. But it was something, a foundation to build on. Maybe. That night, alone in their private chambers, Draven and Seraphina discussed the council's outcome. They didn't believe the oaths, she said. They're cooperating because they're too weak to rebel right now. But give them 10 years to rebuild strength and we'll face this again. I know. So what was the point? The point is we bought 10 years. He poured wine for both of them, expensive vintage from the western provinces. 10 years to solidify alliances, train better armies, establish succession, build something that can survive without us. You think we won't be here in 10 years? I think we're both exhausted. I think ruling this empire is slowly killing us. And I think if we don't establish something sustainable, we'll die and it'll collapse anyway. She drank her wine, considering. So we have 10 years to build a legacy that outlasts us, if we're lucky. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing exhaustion and wine and the understanding that came from fighting side by side through hell. Do you regret it? Seraphina asked quietly. Crowning me. Starting the civil war. All of it. Draven thought about the question seriously, about the thousands who died, the cities burned, the relationships fractured, the empire nearly destroyed because he'd chosen personal desire over political wisdom. No, he said finally. I don't regret it, even knowing the cost. Even knowing the cost. He met her eyes, because the alternative was living without you, and that would have been a slower, lonelier death. At least this way we're dying together. That's dark. We're dark people. He smiled slightly. We crown kinslayers and use forbidden weapons and rule through fear. Darkness is all we have. Is it enough? It has to be. She leaned against him, head on his shoulder, and they sat like that watching fire burn in the hearth. Two people who'd destroyed everything to have each other learning that destruction wasn't the end. That broken things could be pieced back together into something functional, if not beautiful. That love survived even when everything else burned. Outside, the empire slowly rebuilt itself. Walls rose from rubble, Trade routes reopened. Life continued with the stubborn persistence that defined humanity. People forgot the crisis, or learned to live with its memory, or died and were replaced by others who'd never known anything different. The world moved on. It always did. And in the palace at the empire's heart, a king and queen who'd paid every price to keep each other survived another day. Then another. Then another. It wasn't the happy ending stories promised, but it was real. Messy and complicated and stained with blood and regret. But real. And in an empire built on violence and power, reality was the only thing worth fighting for. Tomakus, 5 years later. The empire was stable. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but stable in the way that mattered. The noble houses cooperated through mutual exhaustion. The borders held against external threats. Trade flourished. The population grew. Life continued in patterns that suggested permanence, even though nothing was permanent. Draven was 48 and felt 70. The years of warfare and stress had carved themselves into his body, leaving him slower and in constant pain. His hair had gone mostly gray. His hands shook sometimes from old injuries. The warlord who'd conquered kingdoms was aging into something mortal and breakable. He hated it, but he'd accepted it. Serafina aged differently. She was 36 and looked it, stress and guilt having stolen whatever youth she'd had left. The haunted look never quite left her eyes. She still had nightmares about the siege, about burning soldiers, about her father's blood on her hands. But she functioned, led, ruled beside Draven with the same brilliant efficiency that had saved the Empire. They'd named an heir 2 years ago, Duke Heron's son, a compromise candidate both loyalists and former rebels could accept. The young man was being trained in statecraft and military strategy, prepared to take the throne when Draven died, which would be soon, given the state of his health. They never talked about that, but both knew. On a quiet evening in late autumn, they sat in the same garden where Serafina had cried 5 years ago. The bench was the same, the view was the same, but they were different people now, worn down and rebuilt into harder versions of themselves. "Tell me something good," Serafina said. Draven thought about it. The harvest was excellent this year. Food stores are full. No one will starve this winter. That's not good. That's just logistics. Logistics that keep people alive. "I'll take it." She smiled slightly. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching sunset paint the sky in colors that suggested endings, beautiful and melancholy and inevitable. "Do you think we're good people?" Serafina asked suddenly. "No." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Draven squeezed her hand. "Good people don't do what we've done. They don't kill fathers and use forbidden weapons and rule through fear. We're effective people, successful people, but not good. Does that bother you?" "It used to. Now I think good and evil are luxuries for people who don't have empires to maintain. We did what we had to do. Whether that makes us heroes or villains depends on who writes the history. And if the history calls us villains, then at least we were villains together." He looked at her, seeing the woman who'd killed for him and fought beside him and refused to abandon him even when abandoning would have been smart. "I'd rather be a villain with you than a hero without you." She laughed, quiet and genuine. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. And it's completely twisted. Love usually is." They watched the sun set over the empire they'd bled for, scarred and imperfect, and held together by force and compromise. Not the ideal realm either of them had imagined building, but theirs nonetheless. In the end, that was all anyone got. Not perfect outcomes or clean victories, just the messy reality of survival. The understanding that every choice cost something and some costs were worth paying. That love, real love, wasn't about finding someone who made you better. It was about finding someone willing to stand beside you when you became worse. Someone who saw your darkness and chose you anyway. Someone who'd burned the world with you and helped sweep up the ashes after. Draven had found that in Serafina. She'd found it in him. And whatever else they'd lost along the way, whatever innocence or goodness or peace they'd sacrificed, they still had each other. In an empire built on blood and power, that was the only victory that mattered, the only crown worth wearing, the only prophecy worth fulfilling. The king hadn't died by the woman he crowned. He'd lived because of her, and she'd lived because of him. And together, they'd created something that would outlast them both. Not legend, not glory, just existence. Stubborn, scarred, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. And in a world where empires rose and fell on the strength of the people who ruled them, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end. Because in the empire of alphas, crowns were never won by the gentle, only by those willing to bleed for love and power. And Draven and Seraphina had bled enough for lifetimes. Now they simply endured day after day, holding an empire together through sheer stubborn will and the understanding that some bonds, forged in fire and blood and impossible choices, never broke. Not for prophecy, not for politics, not for anything. They'd survive. Together. Until the end. And that was the only happy ending worth having.